Chapter 1141. It was a cloudy night with neither stars nor moon. It was pitch dark in the small town. Only the faint light from the calligraphy and painting shop could be seen. When it reached the tavern, it was already very faint, but it was enough to illuminate people. The drunkard was dusty, but there was no blood on him. Obviously, he had been to many places in the past 2 days. But he was not anxious, because he was still in the mood to take a bath and change his clothes. At the last moment when Heelan's city collapsed and the teleportation array was activated, his immeasurable state successfully interfered with the chi of heaven and earth. He knew that Haotian and Ning Ke could not return to Chang'an, so he did not need to worry anymore. He believed that no one could travel faster and farther than him in the distanceless state in the long journey. Just like in his long life of cultivation, no one could live longer than him and go farther. However, his face was a little pale and he looked a little tired. First, he was ambushed by Ning Ke, and then one of his hands was blown off. With such a serious injury, even he could not recover in a short period of time. "I have been looking for you everywhere." The drunkard looked at Sang Sang and said. The dim light from afar fell into his deep eyes. He looked like a beast at night in the wilderness. "But I did not expect you to come to my home." Sang Sang said emotionlessly, "Why are you looking for me?" The drunkard said seriously, "You scare me, so I have to kill you as soon as possible." Sang Sang said, "You don't scare me, but I also want to kill you." The drunkard laughed when he heard this, as if he thought it was ridiculous. Haotian, who had divinity but no divine power, was actually just a weak woman. A baby's cry suddenly came from the saddle of the big black horse. Sang Sang looked over there and frowned slightly. She did not expect the baby to be hungry at this time. It seemed that broth was not suitable to be the main food at this time. The drunkard was startled. He stopped laughing and then became louder. "Congratulations." His laughter was extremely presumptuous, full of mockery and pity. If the believers in the human world knew that Haotian had a baby with a mortal, what would they think? Sang Sang was silent and thought of the divine priests and deacons she met in the capital of the kingdom of Song. The drunkard stopped laughing and looked at her with a frown. He asked, "Why? Why what? Why must you become a human? Not to mention the headmaster, Ning Ke and Yi Su. Just as the Abbey Dean said, if you didn't want to become a human, none of this would have happened." Sang Sang said, "I've never thought about it. But since I can become a human, there's nothing bad about it." The drunkard drew out a sharp sword from the flagon, looked at her and said, "No matter how good a person is, or how many kinds of hardships he has suffered, there is always one bad thing that he can't escape from." Sang Sang asked, "What?" The drunkard said, "People will die." After a moment of silence, Sang Sang looked at him and said calmly, "You will die too." The drunkard smiled and said, "How? Killed by you? How are you going to kill them?" Sang Sang looked into the darkness. "You want to use her to threaten me?" The drunkard asked indifferently as he raised the sword in his flagon and pointed it at the beautiful waitress who had spent many nights with him and had an inexplicable affection for him. As soon as he finished speaking, an extremely sharp and traceless sword style broke through the darkness and fell on the throat of the waitress before anyone, including the indigo lion and the black horse, could react. A thin line of blood appeared on her neck which looked like a jade flagon. The waitress opened her eyes wide and looked at the drunkard who was holding the sword. She wanted to say something but could not. The next moment, her head fell into the wine jar and floated restlessly. Sang Sang looked at the waitress's head which was bobbing up and down with the wine and remained silent. No one knew what she was thinking. "Li Man Man has actually done what you want to do. Mr. First of the Academy is known as the most benevolent and righteous man in the world. Don't you think it's ridiculous that he would threaten his enemy with the life of an innocent sister-in-law?" The drunkard still looked indifferent and unaffected after killing the woman he loved. He looked at her with the bloody flagon in his hand and said, "I didn't say anything at that time, but it doesn't mean that I would accept such a threat. But you want to try it too? You have fallen into the human world. The divine kingdom will become our eternal paradise. We will share eternity, immortality, and endless glory. The meaning of life is to pursue eternity. Before that, what is love? What is anything else? He had a high status in the human society and even in the history of mankind. For ordinary people, he was a living Buddha. But at this moment, he looked more like a devil with the bloody sword in his hand. Sang Sang used to think that for humans, some things were more important than their own lives. But now it seemed that it was just her misunderstanding. Or maybe it was because the people she had deep contact with were all from the academy, the city of Wei and Changpan. Those people were different from others. No matter what kind of person the drunkard was, or even if he didn't see her as a human anymore, she would kill him tonight. She took out the abacus and began to count. It was a very simple movement. She moved the beads lightly with her fingertips, from top to bottom or from bottom to top. The wooden partition between the upper and lower grids made a clear sound when the beads hit. It was not like a zither, but like a drum. It was not a war drum, but a tambourine to help with dancing. The dark clouds above the small town suddenly became thicker. With a gust of cold wind from the north, the wetness in the clouds condensed into countless drops of water and fell down. It was a heavy rain. Splash, splash, splash. The rainwater fell on the small town, washing the houses that had been ransacked by the refugees and the felt on the butcher's shop. Perhaps it was because the felt was too greasy and the rainwater could not wash it clean, so the rainwater was a little angry. The rainwater turned into sharp blades and quietly melted the felt into shreds. Then, the bricks and beams of the butcher's shop were all corroded. In just a few breaths, the butcher's shop collapsed into ruins. The blood and grease that had accumulated for countless years on the ground were also washed away. Along the waterfall-like water, it flowed into the crack that the butcher had accidentally slashed out with his meat knife in the past and reached the extremely deep quiet spring. Following the butcher's shop was the wine tavern. The wine songs hidden in the back room were like snow that was pierced by the rain. The raindrops that fell into the wine jar were especially dense and quickly diluted the wine smell. The head of the wine girl disappeared and merged with the wine. With a crack, the wine jar broke into dozens of pieces. The wine rushed into the shop and flowed everywhere. When the wine met the pillars, it was like fire meeting ice. The whole house began to collapse. The heavy rain in the cold night came from the abacus in Sang Sang's hand and the will in her heart. She was Haotian and that was the will of heaven. Now she could not summon the chi of heaven and earth above the East Sea to help her fight. She had no divine power. What she used was imitation. She imitated Ning Kei's writing talismans. She turned her will into psyche power and told the world to know. She used the heavens' calculation to help herself simulate the methods of human cultivation. As long as she calculated, she could imitate it perfectly. Therefore, as soon as she learned how to write talismans from Ning Kei, she wrote a divine talisman. After all, she used to be Haotian. Whether in learning or cultivation, her progress was much faster than that of human beings. This terrible rainstorm once fell on Changpan. The divine talisman she wrote was written by Yen Sei and Ning Quebec. It was the legendary Jing Fu. The strong talisman intent shrouded the whole town along with the heavy rain. The only long street in the town and the thickest dark cloud in the sky were parallel and intersected in space. It was exactly the Jing Fu. The drunkard stood beside the ruins. He was wet all over. His clean clothes were full of holes. His gray hair fell off, revealing his bald head. He looked extremely embarrassed, like a stray dog that had lost its home. The butcher's shop was destroyed. The tavern was destroyed. He indeed had no home. The rain gradually stopped. The flagon in the drunkard's hand was dripping more heavily than before. The rain on his body had turned into blood. He looked severely injured, but he did not fall down. The Jing Fu was a divine talisman, but he had an infinite flagon. Although Sang Sang showed the learning ability and cultivation talent that human beings could not achieve, she could not defeat him. Because she could not surpass the threshold of the 5 states by learning and imitation. His wet hair fell in front of his eyes. He stared at Sang Sang, embarrassed and alert. He did not care about becoming a homeless man. Because his future home would be above the divine kingdom, a perfect and solemn palace. He wanted to kill Sang Sang, but he needed to make sure of one thing first. Where was Ning Ke? The drunkard was really wary of Ning Ke, who did not show up. He was seriously injured by Ning Ke and lost his hand. Although Ning Ke was more seriously injured by him, he knew that Ning Ke's recovery ability was better than his. Just as the academy had always thought, his body had long decayed. Decayed, but still alive. However, it was very difficult to repair it. Whether it was injuries or other problems, it always made him nervous and uneasy. Where was Ning Ke? Sang Sang did not know his current location. She did not need to know. After leaving Helan City, no matter if he was sent to the front gate of Devil's Doctrine, capital Cheng, West Hill or Chang'an, he would always come here. Because she was here. Even if his men couldn't arrive for a while, his arrows would arrive soon enough. The sound of the rain and the beads hitting the abacus disappeared. The small town was silent. The indigo lion raised its paws to shelter the 2 babies from the rain. Now it slowly disappeared into the night with the big black horse. 1989-0309. Sang Sang suddenly said 2 numbers. She lowered her head and looked at the shape of the beads on the abacus. Her voice was soft but carried by the wind to somewhere far away. It should be somewhere in the north. 2 days ago on the cliff outside Helan City, facing the Sea of Flowers, she said 2 numbers to confirm the location when she helped Ning Ke shoot the Abbey Dean. She said 2 numbers to confirm the location. She said 2 numbers for Ning Ke to hear. But for some reason, they were exactly the same. What did this mean? The drunkard's pupils shrank. With a roar from his chest, his body turned illusory and passed through the chi of heaven and earth. He was not sure if he was hundreds or thousands of miles away. The next moment, he returned to the original place from hundreds or thousands of miles away. It was as if he had never left and did nothing. A swoosh sounded behind him. The arrow was already behind him. He dodged the arrow. He was slightly surprised. He turned around and saw an arrow nailed on the broken door of a pawnshop by the street. The arrow pierced very little into the wood. It swayed in the night wind for a while and then fell down. After a fierce mental struggle, I decided to write one more chapter, but it would be very late. Chapter 1142. The drunkard's face turned pale, and he felt remorseful. He had used up a lot of his psyche power to avoid the attack from thousands of miles away, but he did not expect his opponent to use an ordinary arrow. Although it was at least 100 miles away, it was already beyond logic and terrifying to be able to shoot an arrow so far and so accurately. But it was just an ordinary arrow after all. He was afraid of the primordial 13 arrows, and he also avoided them. If he had known it was just an ordinary arrow, he would not have been so cautious. He could have broken it with a wave of his hand. Sang Sang looked at him quietly, without showing any expression of ridicule. She said the other 2 numbers. This time, it was a new number. With a buzzing sound, an arrow pierced through the night sky and went straight for the drunkard's throat. This arrow came faster than the previous one, because the person who shot it was closer to the town. The 2 arrows were shot in the blink of an eye, and the person had run a long distance. He was only 50 miles away from the town. The thunderous roar came from dozens of kilometers away and reached the small town. If one didn't know that it was the sound of a person running too fast and crashing into the air, one would definitely think that the rainstorm that had just stopped had moved to dozens of kilometers away, and that it was a thunderstorm. In the calligraphy and painting shop in the town, Chao Xiaoshu looked calm, as if he was not thinking about anything. Zhang San and Li Si looked at each other and saw the uneasiness in each other's eyes, but they did not know what to do. The big black horse, who was hiding in the darkness of the night, became a little anxious when he heard the rumbling. He lifted his hooves several times and was about to rush out of the town to help, but then he stopped, because he found that the person coming was faster than him. Before the person arrived, the arrow had arrived. The arrow arrived first. The thunder-like sound covered the sound of the arrow piercing through the air. With a very slight sound, an arrow went straight for the drunkard's throat. This time, the drunkard saw it clearly. He waved his sleeves and curled them towards the arrow. With a tearing sound, the wide sleeve of the indigo scholar's robe was torn, and the arrow was nowhere to be found. From the power of the arrow, he judged that Ning Ke was very close to the town, only a few miles away. However, before he could react, the third arrow came. This arrow was not faster than the previous two arrows, and it was clearer to see, but the clarity of the image itself seemed to have a sense of quality. The rotating arrowhead seemed to be tearing apart everything it encountered, and its trajectory was extremely agile. The drunkard stretched out his left hand from his sleeve and flicked his fingers. A streak of clear light appeared in front of him. There was a muffled sound. The arrow fell in front of him, falling into the dirty water on the ground. It was like a swan that had been killed, no longer as agile as before. It had lost all of its life force and became incomparably stiff. The drunkard raised his eyebrows and felt that the arrow was extraordinary. Ning Ke finally appeared. He stood at the end of the town's long street. His body was covered with blood, coagulated blood, and new blood flowed out from the wounds that were reopened because of running. The old blood mixed with the new blood, and together with the dust from the journey of 8,000 miles, he looked very dirty. He looked like a poor beggar who had been beaten by his companions for countless times, just like Long Qing in the past. He had rushed here from thousands of miles away, without sleep or rest for 2 days and 1 night, without regulating his qi circulation, regardless of his injuries. He was already on the verge of collapse. However, he held the iron bow in his hand and looked at the drunkard calmly, as if Min Mountain was unshakable. Looking at Ning Ke and the iron arrow on the iron bow, the drunkard's expression gradually turned solemn and his face turned pale. With a clear whistle, he suddenly disappeared and went 100 miles away. The next moment, he returned from 100 miles away and appeared in front of Sang Sang. He pointed between her eyebrows with one finger. The indigo lion that had been guarding Sang Sang's side had its mane scattered like arrows. An extremely wild lion roar resounded between heaven and earth, and the tiles in the dead silent town were flying in all directions. The drunkard's body emitted a clear light. His finger passed through the clear light, and with an immeasurable amount of qi of heaven and earth, it shattered countless arrow-like mane and tiles, and accurately pointed at the indigo lion's head. The indigo lion roared, and countless vajra murderous intent condensed from Buddha's breath spurted out from its mouth. However, like the mane and tiles, it could not stop the drunkard's finger. With a furious roar, the indigo lion retreated with blood spilling out. Sang Sang turned her wrist, and the abacus instantly shattered. Dozens of abacus beads flew through the clear light and fell on the drunkard's chest, making a series of dense popping sounds. The drunkard's mouth was bleeding, but he was still moving like lightning. He continued to point between her eyebrows, determined to kill her. He even ignored the talisman written by the abacus beads began to spread talisman intent. Before the finger arrived, the finger intent had already arrived. An unimaginable amount of qi of heaven and earth followed the drunkard's finger and pierced, no, it should be blasted between Sang Sang's eyebrows. This time, he did not even use the sword in the flagon. Sang Sang's face turned extremely pale. If it were in the past, she would have been able to deal with such a desperate attack with just a glance. But now, she needed help from others. Blood flowed out from the corner of her eye, and it looked extremely terrifying. The drunkard continued to move forward. He only needed a moment to kill Sang Sang with his finger. Unfortunately, he was still a moment late. Because Ning Kei's arrow had arrived. This time, it was not an ordinary arrow, but an iron arrow. The drunkard retreated, and retreated for hundreds of miles. Then he came back. He looked at the wound left by the iron arrow on his left shoulder, and the blood that dripped onto the ground and merged into the dirty water. He was silent for a moment, and then he raised his head and looked at Ning Kei, who was standing beside Sang Sang. He was at the end of the street, dozens of feet away from the ruins of the tavern, and very close to the calligraphy and painting shop. Previously, he decided to kill Sang Sang because Ning Kei's iron arrow was very troublesome. Now that he failed, he did not look anxious, because he had to be calm. Only by being absolutely calm could he avoid Ning Kei's iron arrow. He reached out his right shoulder, as if he was dusting off dust, and the blood fell onto the ground. Ning Kei's iron arrow came again. Before the iron arrow left the bowstring, the drunkard had already sensed the movement of Ning Kei's fingers, and he acted in advance. A muffled sound was heard. A clear arrow path appeared on the long street. The newly condensed water vapor was blurry in the long street, which was filled with the breeze after the rain. It reflected the dim light in the calligraphy and painting shop, giving people a weird feeling. The drunkard returned to the street, untied the flagon on his waist, and drank a few mouthfuls of wine, regardless of the wine dripping all over his body. Then he looked at Ning Kei quietly, and slowly drew out a sharp sword from the flagon. The iron arrow came again. He dodged again. He came back again. He looked at the quiver on Ning Kei's back, and asked a very important question. How many iron arrows do you have left? Ning Kei did not answer his question. His face was covered with dirt and blood, but his expression was surprisingly calm. This was not Chang'an. He could not borrow the power of the god-stunning array, and Sang Sang could not support him with endless Haotian's divine flame like before. Without the inheritance of his master, without the enlightenment of Haotian, he only had himself. The drunkard did not expect to hear an answer. He knew that Ning Kei only had one iron arrow left, and victory was right in front of him. Most importantly, he had confirmed that Ning Kei's arrow could not hit him at all. Ning Kei continued to shoot arrows, ordinary arrows. In the small town, the shrill sound of arrows piercing through the air could be heard. The sound of arrows was so dense that it seemed to have no end. Whoosh! 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 The arrows left the bowstring and accurately shot at the drunkard at a terrifying speed. They tore through the air and tore through the night. Countless shadows of arrows even lit up the dark town. The drunkard moved like a ghost, waving his sleeves like dancing. No matter how fast or how accurate Ning Kei's arrows were, they could not hit him. Because he was really too fast. It was quiet on the street. Arrows were everywhere. Arrows were stuck in the broken eaves of the pawn shop. Arrows were deeply stuck in the stone steps of the rice shop. Arrows were cracked like spider webs on the bluestone slabs. It was not hard to imagine how powerful Ning Kei's archery was to be able to pierce through the hard stones. Such archery skills still did not kill the drunkard. Ning Kei maintained the posture of drawing the bow and aimed at the drunkard silently. He did not release the bowstring. His arms were slightly trembling because of the exhaustion from the previous series of shots. There were only a few ordinary arrows and one iron arrow left in the quiver on his back. The drunkard looked at him emotionlessly and said, "Shoot me if you can." Ning Kei did not speak, because he really could not hit him. Because of his silence, the drunkard laughed. His laughter was full of mockery and disdain. "Go ahead." Ning Kei did not shoot, nor did he put down the iron bow. He was waiting. He was waiting for the moment, and the drunkard could not move back and forth. The drunkard stood in front of the calligraphy and painting shop. The dim light in the shop passed through the paper window and fell on his face. It was a little mottled, like leaves that did not leave the branches in autumn but were soaked in the autumn rain for a few days. Suddenly, a strong array intent emerged from the mottled light on his face. There aren't three things today, just one. Mountie 1118, the lucky draw of a certain WeChat official account, will officially start tomorrow. Everyone is welcome to follow. The prizes will be announced tomorrow. It should be pretty good. Of course, it's a pity that I haven't found any sponsors. So I'll do it myself. Oh, by the way, the drunkard will be killed tomorrow. Don't worry about the ending. Of course it's awesome. I've thought about it since 3 years ago. Chapter 1143. The mottled light and shadow came from the flowers on the window paper. The door was the passage from the house to the outside world, and so was the window. But it was not. The window could only let the eyes pass through, but more often than not, it represented imprisonment. For example, the small stone window in the secluded prison represented despair. The array intent was also imprisonment. It appeared without any warning and was about to cover the drunkard's entire body, from his face to his indigo gown to his cloth shoes. Once the array was formed, he would never be able to leave. Ning Ke was at the other end of the street, aiming at the drunkard with his iron bow. If the drunkard could not leave, he would be locked by the array intent. Death would be waiting for him in the next moment. However, just when the array intent formed by the mottled light and shadow was formed, the drunkard moved. He took a step back, and the soles of his shoes fell on the bluestone floor, making a light sound. The rainwater splashed, the light and shadow were separated, and then dispersed. Along with the bluestone floor that was crushed by his foot, the stone steps in front of the calligraphy and painting shop collapsed, and the cracks spread rapidly. In the chaos, several large cracks appeared on the door of the calligraphy and painting shop. Both the door and the window were instantly turned into broken wood and paper. The beams were broken, and the smoke and dust were everywhere. The whole shop collapsed in the smoke and dust. It was only because the drunkard took a step back. The timing of his step was extremely precise. It was just before the array intent was formed. It seemed that he knew there was an array in the calligraphy and painting shop a long time ago. The smoke and dust settled, and the floor was full of rubble. It was a mess. Zhang San and Li Si were lying in the corner of the ruins, covered in blood and dust. They were blown to the backyard. The two young men had many broken bones. They were in unbearable pain when they moved a little. But they were still unwilling to give up. They searched the broken bricks for a long time and found 2 kitchen knives. The drunkard turned around and looked at the 2 young Tangs indifferently. Under his gaze, Zhang San and Li Si spat out blood and could not stand up again. Is this the Academy's plan, or yours? The drunkard looked at Sang Sang, who was standing beside the ruins of the butcher's shop dozens of feet away. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. Because everything had become a joke to him. Then, his smile gradually disappeared. He looked at Chao Xiaoshu, who stood up from the broken wall of the calligraphy and painting shop, and said expressionlessly, "You want to kill me?" Chao Xiaoshu walked to the broken stone steps, patted off the dust on his body and tidied his clothes. He bowed to the drunkard calmly and said, "I'm Chao Xiaoshu, of course I'm going to kill you." He was Chao Xiaoshu, and Chao Xiaoshu was a Tang. Therefore, he had countless reasons to kill the drunkard. "Of course I know you are Chao Xiaoshu." The drunkard looked at him indifferently and said, "We have been neighbors and friends in this small town all these years. You drink tea and I drink wine. Do you really think I don't know who you are?" Chao Xiaoshu was silent for a moment and asked, "Since you already knew, why did you wait until now?" "Because I'm very curious about how you, or the Academy, are going to kill me. You know, you are now a useless person, and your 2 helpers are reckless and don't know how to cultivate. Yes, to me, being with you is just a game, an interesting game. The drunkard said, after living for a long time, it's inevitable that it's boring. It's rare to meet such an interesting person like you, and such an interesting thing. Of course, I want to spend more time and see how the game is played. Then, he looked at Sang Sang and said, I think you should understand the feelings of humans like us. Sang Sang said expressionlessly, I don't understand. I've been with him since I started living. He is a very interesting person, so there's nothing boring about living. She was talking about Ning Ke, of course. The drunkard was a little confused, and then laughed. He shook his head and sighed, yes, Haotian is married and has a child. The world is crazy, how can it be boring? What about you? What's so interesting about the game you've prepared for me? The drunkard looked at Chao Xiaoshu and said calmly, this array. Then I'll be very disappointed. Chao Xiaoshu said, it's indeed a little simple, but we all think it should work. Your biggest weakness is your body, which is no different from an ordinary person, and even more easily decayed. The two kids and I are all ordinary people. Even if you know who we are, you won't be vigilant. Just like you said, this is just a game. If you play this game with us, then we might be able to imprison you. The drunkard was silent for a while and said, who can predict my mind so clearly? Is it Mr. First or Mr. Second? Ning Ke didn't say anything until then, it's the third sister. Indeed the 23-year cicada cultivation. I admire her, but I also don't. The drunkard shook his head and said, she did find my weakness, both physically and psychologically. You have enough opportunities to attack me, because I won't use the immeasurable state to be vigilant against you all the time, and it takes time to change my mind. But she got one thing wrong. This array is too weak. He looked at Ning Ke and said, if it's the confinement, there might be some hope. Ning Ke said, even if we could ask Yi Hongyu to help us back then, the moment she appeared in the small town was the moment you launched an attack or flew away. It's meaningless. The drunkard said, so it's a contradiction. Ordinary people can get close to me, but they don't have the power to kill me. Ning Ke said, you're too afraid of death, so you're too vigilant. The drunkard said, yes. That's why I never drank Mr. Chow's tea in the beginning, because I was afraid that he would poison it. I preferred to drink my own wine. Ning Ke said, your habit is actually not good. No wonder you don't have any friends. The drunkard smiled. But Chao Xiaoshu did not smile. He remembered that the drunkard had begun to drink his tea in the last 2 years. He thought about the hidden meaning and remained silent. The drunkard's smile gradually disappeared. He looked at Chao Xiaoshu and said calmly, yes, I don't have any friends. The butcher is more like a partner. I also want a friend. I've heard about the story of that rainy night in the Spring Breeze Pavilion. I always felt that it was a good feeling when you went to the old brush pen shop to find that little guy. The relationship between you two was very interesting. So I also want to see if I can become friends with you. We can drink tea together and talk about interesting things. The story of that rainy night in the Spring Breeze Pavilion had long been spread as Ning Ke and Chao Xiaoshu became famous in the world. It had even become a legend. Coincidentally, the 3 people involved were all here today. They gathered in a small town at the intersection of the Song and Yen dynasties to kill. Ning Ke stood in front of Sang Sang. Chao Xiaoshu stood beside the drunkard. It doesn't matter if you lie to me. But why can't you keep lying to me? The drunkard walked to Chao Xiaoshu with an indifferent expression. Deep in his eyes, there was a hint of tyranny. Since you can't lie to me or kill me, then why are you still alive? His voice was calm and cold, but in fact, he was very angry. Except for himself, few people could understand why he was so angry. Countless years of life were not easy to bear. I'm a person who is willing to make friends. Chao Xiaoshu looked at him quietly and said. No one could question his words. The whole world knew that Chao Xiaoshu was the best friend, and the best friend to make. He was sincere and generous, never doubting anyone, and was incomparably carefree. Only a person like him could call the emperor of the Tang Empire a brother. He could also randomly pick up a friend like Ning Ke from a roadside calligraphy and painting shop. If you want, I can also be friends with you. Although you are too senior and too old, friendship has nothing to do with seniority in age. It's only about congenial interests. Cao Xiaoshu continued, I admit that I came to this small town to set up a trap to kill you. But after so many years, that trap is no longer a trap. You know that I'm Cao Xiaoshu. Don't I know that you know that I'm Cao Xiaoshu? So although I didn't say it explicitly, I didn't lie to you. I even thought about whether I could persuade you. If I could, it would be the best. If not, then I don't owe you anything. Owe you anything? No, you don't owe me anything. I've lived in this world for countless years. I've seen countless sinister and cunning people. I've experienced countless schemes and the ugliest, most deformed, and most perverted things in the world. So, do you really think I care about that cup of tea in the shop? The drunkard looked at him and said emotionlessly, your trap is no longer a trap for me. He was one of the most powerful grand cultivators in the history of cultivation. Cao Xiaoshu was only at the knowing destiny state when he was at his peak. Now he could no longer cultivate and became an ordinary person. As long as he glanced at Cao Xiaoshu would die. Neither Ning Ke nor Sang Sang could stop it. Cao Xiaoshu looked back at him calmly and fearlessly and said, I've said it before. It's no longer a trap. But when you want to kill me, it will reappear. The drunkard asked, what do you mean? Cao Xiaoshu said, I'm the trap. The drunkard slightly raised his eyebrows. Cao Xiaoshu said again, I'm waiting for the right moment. The right moment was the right moment. Ning Ke had been waiting for an opportunity. He was waiting for the moment and the drunkard could no longer enter the distanceless state. He had waited for 2 days and 1 night, but it didn't happen. Cao Xiaoshu was also waiting for an opportunity. He had been waiting for several years. But the opportunity he was waiting for was different from Ning Ke's. He was waiting for the right moment to find him. The drunkard didn't want to listen anymore. Out of the inexplicable anger in the presence of Ning Ke and Haotian, he decided to kill Cao Xiaoshu. He slapped at Cao Xiaoshu's chest. Cao Xiaoshu couldn't avoid the attack of a grand cultivator. Cao Xiaoshu didn't want to avoid it either. He felt the coming of death. Even though he was determined and had already seen through the vast seashore flower, he couldn't help but fall into a trance for a moment. The drunkard's palm fell on his chest and abdomen. With a soft sound, a sharp sword tip pierced out from his palm. It was an invisible sword. The sword edge was cold and the sword style was condensed and clear. Where did this sword come from? This sword had always been in Cao Xiaoshu's body. Some people had a ghost in their left eye, some had a person in their sense of perception, some had a soul in their ring, and some had a sword in their body. The sword was not hidden in the belly of a fish, but in his abdomen. No matter where the drunkard's palm fell, as long as the killing intent came, the sword would appear. At this moment, the sword pierced through his chest and abdomen, and then pierced through the drunkard's palm. This was the sword's self-reaction. It was a gesture of mutual destruction. The drunkard's face suddenly turned pale, and he felt extreme fear. He screamed and quickly retreated. After a few steps back, his body had already turned invisible. However, the sword came faster. The sword edge pierced through Cao Xiaoshu's chest and abdomen, with blood. The invisible edge was condensed by the blood and wind, and then became solid. With a puff, it pierced deeply into the drunkard's abdomen. The drunkard was indeed one of the fastest people in the world. But he couldn't avoid the sword if he stood within 1 foot of Cao Xiaoshu. Even the eldest brother didn't dare to stand within 1 foot of the sword when he was by the lake. What kind of sword was it? It was an ordinary sword that didn't need to be described deliberately, but it was full of killing intent. This sword came from the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom, and belonged to Lu Bai, the Sage of Sword. This was a sword that Cao Xiaoshu borrowed from Lu Bai. This was a plot of the academy, and it came from the words of the headmaster of academy. A gentleman hides his weapon in his body, and waits for the right time. This sentence could be used to describe, but there was also a simpler explanation. Cao Xiaoshu had a sword hidden in his body. When the drunkard wanted to kill him, the sword would move and kill him. Weapon was an object, and in some cases, it referred to weapons, especially swords. Weapon was also courage. Cao Xiaoshu had waited for years just to stab this sword. In other words, he had been waiting to die. This was great courage. The drunkard was in great pain. His eyes were filled with shock, confusion, and even confusion. The sword came too fast and too steeply, and there was no way to avoid it. He vaguely understood that this was Lu Bai's sword. Yes, in this world, only Lu Bai's sword could be so resolute, so fast, and so unrepentant. Even if he was the drunkard, he would be severely injured by this sword. Cao Xiaoshu's sword had destroyed 90% of his vitality, and destroyed his ocean of qi and mountain of snow. The drunkard's face turned pale, and he kept retreating. His body kept turning illusory. He didn't want to die. He wanted to escape. He slapped the street with his palm, and countless dust and gravel were stirred up, blocking Ning Kei's sight. Zhang San and Li Si scrambled out of the ruins of the calligraphy and painting shop, and slashed wildly with their kitchen knives. They didn't care whether they were slashing gods or Buddhas. The two young men even closed their eyes when they were slashing. Crack, crack. The kitchen knives cut off the drunkard's left toe, and the heel of his right foot. The drunkard's abdomen was stabbed, and blood flowed out. His feet were also bleeding, and his cloth shoes were wet. He howled in anger, and drew out 17 swords from the flagon, and stabbed at Cao Xiaoshu, Zhang San, and Li Si randomly. In the darkness, Sang Sang's voice was suddenly heard. She said 2 numbers. A buzzing sound came from the other side of the dust. An arrow pierced through the air, and accurately hit the drunkard's knee. Blood spurted out. The drunkard yelled in pain, and couldn't keep his balance. He fell to the ground, and the 17 swords that he drew out from the flagon fell to the ground like scattered leaves. With a boom, the dust dispersed, and the darkness was in chaos. Ning Kei dashed to the middle of the field, and kicked him to the ground. His right foot stepped heavily on his chest. The drunkard's sternum was broken with a crisp sound. The drunkard gasped, and his eyes were filled with unwillingness and anger. He still didn't want to die, and he wanted to live. He desperately summoned the qi of heaven and earth, and tried to escape. Ning Kei pulled the iron bow, and took aim. The iron bow was bent like a full moon, and the iron arrow on the string was as cold as frost. In fact, he didn't need to aim. The cold arrow pointed directly between the drunkard's eyebrows. No matter who it was, it would not miss. In the previous battle, the drunkard said to him, "Shoot me if you can." At this moment, Ning Kei said, "Dodge this arrow if you can." A buzzing sound was heard. The iron arrow left the string, and pierced between the drunkard's eyebrows. A deep arrow hole appeared on the street of the small town. The iron arrow disappeared into the ground. The drunkard's head also disappeared, and turned into a pool of blood. I like the sword in Cao Xiaoshu's body, I like to shoot the drunkard's knee, and I like to shoot between the drunkard's eyebrows. Making up stories is a good job, though tiring. Please vote monthly. Chapter 1144. He wanted to wrap up the final plot and make it more solid. I believe everyone is as confident as I am. TSK, who are we? If we work hard, even Sang Sang is afraid of us. Tomorrow at the 3rd watch. Yes, please cast your monthly vote. Chapter 1145. There was a sentence in the chapter from the day before yesterday. It was a single line. I wrote it like this sentence describes. Maybe some students didn't see it and thought that I just typed the wrong punctuation. Actually, that's not the case. After the sentence, there's a long explanation about how a gentleman hides his weapon and waits for the right time. When I was writing it, I couldn't think of anything good. I racked my brains and forgot about it. Here's the explanation. In addition, today's chapter is especially troublesome. I'm about to vomit blood from writing it. I'm still working hard. When I finish writing the first chapter, it'll probably be late at night. If you want to wait, then wait. If you don't want to wait, then go to bed early. You can read it tomorrow because this paragraph is indeed a little twisted. Chapter 1146. The rain above the small town had long stopped, but the clouds were still there. The iron arrow went straight into the ground and stopped after a long time. The tremors on the ground were very small. However, it was strange that the field outside the town was shaking violently. Withered seedlings fell down and the stream was overturned. The tremors spread to the town and the dilapidated houses collapsed one after another. The tremors on the ground seemed to be transmitted to the night sky in the next moment. The gloomy clouds began to roll like boiling water, twisting and twisting, but showing no signs of dispersing. It was like the expression of a human in pain. The drunkard's corpse decayed or weathered rapidly along with the tremors of heaven and earth. It turned into something like yellow sand and then disappeared after being blown by the wind from the night sky. Looking at this scene, Ning Ke recalled the unusual phenomenon that occurred when he opened the Taming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane in the wilderness many years ago. He finally understood what killing the drunkard meant to the world. He still did not understand why the drunkard's corpse would become like this. Only Sang Sang knew that it was because the drunkard was no longer a normal human being. In other words, the drunkard was no longer a human being. The drunkard was not an ordinary cultivator, but a grand cultivator. He was at the level of the headmaster of academy, Buddha, Koharan and the abbey dean. Even the term grand cultivator was not accurate. He and the butcher came from ancient times and had existed in this world long before the Buddha. The generation of the headmaster and the abbey dean 1,000 years ago and the generation of Koharan decades ago were all his descendants. He and the butcher were the real legends, or should they be called legends? He had lived for countless years and seemed to live forever. But tonight, he died. It seemed that a person who would never die had died. It meant that life and death were not predetermined. Ning Ke did not spend too much time and energy on this matter. He walked directly to Cao Xiaoshu and looked at Sang Sang. The sword borrowed from Lu Bai broke Cao Xiaoshu's body. This was a trap set up by the academy many years ago. Everyone knew that once it started, Cao Xiaoshu would definitely die. However, since life and death were not predetermined, who said that Cao Xiaoshu would definitely die? Ning Ke thought so. He did not believe in destiny even if it was so. He did not believe in destiny at all, because Sang Sang was right beside him. Can you cure it? Ning Ke looked at her and asked. Back then, he cut the abbey dean into pieces, and then he himself was cut into pieces by her. Xiong Chumo's hand was broken, but no matter how serious the injury was, she could heal it with a glance. Although he knew that she was far from the old Haotian, he still had great expectations. Even if it was me in the past, it would have been very difficult to treat. Sang Sang walked to the broken stone steps and looked at Cao Xiaoshu, who was covered in blood, and said expressionlessly. This was the truth, because Lu Bai's sword was too sharp, and Cao Xiaoshu was seriously injured. Ning Ke was silent as he held Cao Xiaoshu's hand. There was sadness in his eyes. Cao Xiaoshu looked at him with a pale face and squeezed out a smile with difficulty. He was not prepared to leave any last words at the last moment of his life. As long as the Tang Empire and the Academy could win in the end, he believed that the people and things he worried about would be taken care of. Then what else could he worry about? At this time, Sang Sang said. But I can cure it now. Ning Ke was a little confused and did not understand what she meant by that. Sang Sang gently stroked the horrible wound on Chao Xiaoshu's chest and abdomen, and a clear light gradually appeared. She took out a bag of needles and thread from nowhere and said calmly, I have experience with this kind of injury. Yes. In the Taoist temple in the capital of the Kingdom of Song, her abdomen was also cut open by a sword, and then she cured it herself. She was indeed experienced in this aspect. Looking at the needle and thread going back and forth on Chao Xiaoshu's chest, Ning Ke suddenly remembered that Sang Sang used to worry that her needlework was not as good as those girls in Chang and when they left the city of Wei many years ago. But he did not know that Sang Sang also thought of the same scene in the Taoist temple last night. Chao Xiaoshu's face was still pale, but his breathing was much steadier, and he began to fall asleep. He was relieved and could no longer bear the extreme physical and mental exhaustion, so he sat on the wet ground. It was not until then that he noticed that there were 2 more bamboo baskets beside the saddle of the big black horse. He also noticed that Sang Sang's face was still plump, but her waist and abdomen were not as bloated as when they reunited in the snow region. The big black horse walked to him and bent its front hooves so that he could see more clearly. Looking at the 2 babies sleeping soundly in the bamboo baskets, Ning Ke woke up after a long time. He did not know why, but he felt warm and happy in his chest and abdomen. The drunkard was dead, but second brother Chao was still alive. Sang Sang had given birth to 2 children for him. Perhaps there was no such thing as reincarnation between life and death. There was great terror, but there was also great joy. After confirming that Chao Xiaoshu's life was not in danger, Ning Ke did not waste any time. He took Sang Sang and left the small town on the big black horse. They rushed to Tuyang City in the west as fast as they could. Tuyang City was the station of the northeast border military of the Tang Empire. There was also a transmission array there, which was the fastest way to return to Chang'an. In the middle of the night, it was the darkest time of the night. In an inconspicuous house behind the general's mansion in Tuyang City, a beam of clear light spread out. The aura of heaven and earth was disturbed for a while, and then it became quiet again. The next moment, a circle of clear light also spread out in the inconspicuous small building deep in the imperial palace of Chang'an. The aura of heaven and earth moved freely like clouds. The animals on the eaves of the imperial palace looked in that direction with vigilance. The imperial guards and the officials of the imperial center administration who received the alarm rushed to the small building as fast as they could. They confirmed that the transmission array had been opened, but they did not find any news. They could not help but feel a little confused. After a while, Li Yu brought the young emperor who had just woken up to the small building. She saw a broken arrow and vaguely guessed what had happened. Her heart, which had been tense because of the war, was instantly relieved. Ning Ke was back. The House of Red Sleeves in the middle of the night was usually the busiest time. But now it was the time of war. The girls of the song and dance troupe were encouraging the soldiers on the battlefield with the military ministry's condolence group. Moreover, under the strict and cold gaze of Shengguan Yangyu, no high-ranking officials, nobles, or rich businessmen dared to seek pleasure, so it was very quiet. What was a little strange was that there was an unusually handsome big black horse and a listless green-skinned dog outside the building. Could it be that there were guests tonight? There were indeed 2 distinguished guests at the House of Red Sleeves today, but it was obvious that they were not here to have fun. In the quiet room on the top floor, Mistress Jian and Xiao Chao each held a baby in their arms. Their emotions were very complicated. It was rare to see parents who left their newborn babies aside and did not care about them. At this time, Ning Ke and Sang Sang were in front of the house by the Yanming Lake. To be exact, they were on the embankment of the lake. They stood in front of the leafless willows and looked at the lake covered with snow in silence. They reunited after a long time and returned to their old house. They did not reminisce about the past, nor did they lament about the past. Instead, they were thinking about something more important. Ning Ke held the array pestle of the god-stunning array in his hand. Sang Sang stood beside him with her hands behind her back, as she was used to doing in the human world all these years. She looked very much like an elder. That character. I still can't write it, he said. Sang Sang turned around and looked at him. She was not sure whether he couldn't write it or he didn't want to write it. Even though they were telepathically connected, she could not tell. Because this matter was too complicated. I suddenly miss Long Qing, Ning Ke said again. In a sense, in his story, Long Qing was the real supporting actor. But different from those stories, he did not have any feelings for Long Qing. Naturally, he would not appreciate Long Qing. He just thought of the things that Long Qing had comprehended before he died by the river of anger, and some things that were related to the big character. Ning Ke threw the seriously injured Chao Xiaoshu to his two unreliable martial nephews and his newborn son and daughter to the brothel. It did not mean that Ning Ke was irresponsible. He was in a hurry to return to Chang'an, just to write that character. But that character was too big. It was so big that even with the help of the god-stunning array, it was still difficult for him to write it. The distant west wilderness, the southeast sea, and the even more distant snow sea were all too far away. It is said that the human mind can go as far as it can go, but no one has ever thought that such a thing as the mind itself is so indiscernible, and how difficult it is to make it go to a distant place. Ning Ke thought of the dream he had many years ago. It was the dream of the first awareness state. In that dream, he saw a vast sea. When he had that dream, he was holding Sang Sang. If he had Sang Sang's help, he might be able to spread his psyche power to the ends of the earth and the corners of the sea. But how could he say it? Sang Sang turned around and a small willow stool appeared between her fingers. She looked at him and asked, "Do you think the children will like this?" Ning Ke said, "I like it very much." "Of course they will like it." Sang Sang looked at him quietly and suddenly said, "What did you say in that cabin?" Ning Ke was silent for a moment and said, "I said. I don't have to do it." Sang Sang said, "But you still want to write that character?" Ning Ke said, "Yes." Sang Sang looked at the night sky. There was no snow or rain in Chang'an tonight. There was a bright moon in the sky. Even if I will die if I write that character. I don't think it should be like this. Sang Sang said, "Even if I am willing to help you, I don't know how." Ning Ke said, "I know the situation." "And then?" "There is no then." Ning Ke looked at her and said, "No one is qualified to ask you to die, even if it is for the whole human race. I am not qualified to say that. So there is no then." Sang Sang looked at his hand and noticed that he was holding the array pestle so tightly that his knuckles were a little white. For Ning Ke, Chang'an was safe. Even if the Abbey Dean came, he could do nothing. But the war was not over. The Abbey Dean, eldest brother and the West Hill were all important. He looked calm, but in fact, his heart was in turmoil. The twisting cloud above the town looked like a human face in pain. The face looked at the earth and every corner of the human world. So everyone who could see it saw it. On the cliff outside Helan City, the Abbey Dean and eldest brother stood hundreds of feet apart. Their indigo clothes were torn and their cotton-padded clothes were stained with blood. 2 days and 1 night were enough for a lot of things to happen. There were no bystanders and no recorder of the battle that happened on the cliff. Otherwise, it would definitely be one of the top 5 battles in history, no matter in terms of level or degree. The Abbey Dean looked at the cloud in the south and kept silent for a long time. Then he said, "The drunkard is really dead." Even he was a little shocked by this seemingly impossible thing. Eldest brother looked at that place and said nothing. The Abbey Dean turned to him and said, they are back in Chang'an. You don't have to stop me anymore. Eldest brother calmly raised the wooden stick and put it in front of his eyebrows again. He did not say anything, but his meaning was clear. Ning Ke and Sang Sang finally got rid of all the obstacles and returned to Chang'an. The Abbey Dean could not enter Chang'an, so he did not have to continue to stop them by burning his life. The Abbey Dean asked, "Why?" Eldest brother answered, "The headmaster has read the 7 volumes of arcane tomes." The Abbey Dean kept silent for a while and said, "It seems that you know what I want to do." Eldest brother said, "The point is, I know what you want to do." The meaning of this sentence was not as clear as the wooden stick in front of his eyebrows. But if one pondered it carefully, one could understand some important information hidden in it. Chang'an could help Ning Ke defeat the Abbey Dean, but it could not stop the Abbey Dean from taking Sang Sang's divine personality. The headmaster had read the 7 volumes of arcane tomes and knew all the secrets of Taoism. The Abbey Dean thought for a while and then disappeared. Eldest senior brother then disappeared. The cliff that had witnessed the battle between the 2 most powerful people in the world was still silent. If one were to head north from any place in this world, they would eventually arrive at the foot of that snowy peak. The snow-capped peak was the tallest mountain in the world. A few years ago, the snow-capped peak broke into 2 because of a meteor that fell like a stream of light. The upper half fell into the dark ocean behind the mountain, but the snow-capped peak was still the tallest mountain in the world. This snow-capped peak was the highest without the need to enter the world. Also, the Abbey Dean and the eldest brother were the highest without the need to enter the world. Therefore, this was the perfect place for the final battle. The Abbey Dean's sword reflected the starlight all over the sky and came to the eldest brother. The stars in the night sky were so beautiful and mesmerizing. So was the sword. No one could tell where it came from. Eldest brother couldn't tell either, so he didn't look. He held the wooden stick and simply thrust it forward. With a swoosh, the stick had already arrived in front of the Abbey Dean. The natural stream magical finger seal, the sky full of stars returned with the sword, blocking this extremely sharp stick. A star on the surface of the sword leaped out of the night sky and landed on the eldest brother's hand that was holding the stick. Blood flowed out slightly. The stick was blocked, but the intent of the stick kept moving forward. There was a slight buzz. The ebony fork on the Abbey Dean's Taoist bun was broken. His black hair draped over his shoulders and danced in the snow wind. He looked at the eldest brother and praised, "Li Man Man, who dares to say that you are slow from now on? This is the first chapter. There are 2 more chapters. It must be very slow. I am not Li Man Man. Take your time." Because of the painstaking writing, there must be a lot of typos and sentence problems in this chapter. Please forgive me. I don't have the energy to revise it. I will discuss it later. Chapter 1147. A person's name often had its origin or meaning. For example, Ning Ke, Sang Sang, and Jun Mo. Of course, names like Tsuehua and Area were excluded. Li Man Man was called Li Man Man because he was very slow. He talked and acted slowly, walked slowly, and even cultivated slowly. It took him 17 years to reach the no-doubt state, which was totally incomparable to his younger brothers and sisters. Of course, after that, he suddenly became very fast. It only took him 3 months to reach the see-through state and then the knowing destiny state in the evening. Li Man Man was such a person. At the beginning, he was extremely slow, and then he became extremely fast. He walked extremely slowly, but he was the fastest person in the world. Similarly, he had never fought before. Whether it was Yi Su or anyone else, he had always admitted this, but he had never believed it to be the truth. Then he learned to fight and kill, so he became fast. He mastered countless fighting skills at an unimaginable speed, such as Chen Pippi's natural stream magical finger, Jun Mo's mutual respect, Haran sword, and the headmaster's cudgel, including the one he used to stab the Abbey Dean. He used Lu Bai's sword. Of course, such a sword was not slow. This was Li Man Man, the slowest Li Man Man, the fastest Li Man Man. The Abbey Dean stood on the snow-capped peak and looked up at the bright moon surrounded by stars in the night sky. He praised, "You have taught a good disciple." There was no resentment in his words, only admiration. Even though he was a grand cultivator in the state of pureness and could be indifferent to the greed, anger, and infatuation of the world, it was not the same as ignoring them. The Abbey Dean still had his own pursuit. Ever since he was defeated by the headmaster, he never expected to defeat him. But he still hoped that his disciple could defeat the headmaster's disciple. In fact, the two disciples he taught were indeed great. Yi Su founded the new stream and eventually became a sage. However, he was clear that Yi Su's transformation was inseparable from Li Man Man's enlightenment in Chang'an. Long Qing walked on a path that no one had ever walked before, but he was still killed by Ning. Quebec's eldest brother bowed slightly when he heard the Abbey Dean praising the headmaster. He did not think much of it. In his eyes, it was a matter of course. Otherwise, why would the Abbey Dean let his son be the headmaster's disciple? The night grew darker. It was the real night, and it also represented the night spreading from the north. Just like in the past few years, the human world was slowly getting colder. In the past, the West Hill Divine Kingdom was as warm as spring even in the middle of winter. But now, there had been several snowfalls, and the Green Mountains were covered with snow. Snow covered the field. The Tang army from the north and the Great River Kingdom from the south had invaded the West Hill Divine Kingdom more than 10 days ago. The cavalrymen of Divine Halls retreated in defeat and finally retreated within a radius of hundreds of miles around Peach Mountain. All the passages from Peach Mountain to the human world had fallen into the hands of the Tang army and the Great River Kingdom's army. Peach Mountain was trapped and became a lonely peak. The situation had been going on for more than 10 days, and the Tang army had not launched the final attack. Mr. Second and Mr. Third, who represented the academy, had not entered the town. No one knew where they went. Perhaps it was because they did not have the confidence to break the array of clear light that enveloped the Peach Mountain, or because of the butcher in the town. The longer the battle went on, the worse it would be for the enemy army to be besieged. Su Qi was the leader of the Tang army. Logically, he would not make such a mistake, so it meant that the academy was in charge. Just like the previous nights, the wind and snow were still falling slowly tonight. The town was quiet, as if nothing would happen again, and they would have to suffer the next morning, but footsteps were heard outside the town. The butcher took off his leather coat and picked up the heavy butcher knife from the chopping board. He walked out of the door and looked at Jun Mo, who was walking slowly towards him. His expression was extremely indifferent, or rather cold. "Are you here to die?" Jun Mo stopped in front of him and raised one hand to salute. He said, "The drunkard is dead." The cloud that looked like a painful human face was still floating in the night sky in the faraway town in the north. It was actually not very high, so it should not be visible from the Peach Mountain thousands of miles away. But there were people who could see it clearly. The butcher came from the small town in the north. How could he not see the cloud? He had lived with the drunkard in this world for countless years. How could he not hear the news of his death? He said nothing and looked at Jun Mo silently, as if he was looking at a dead man. Anyone who was stared at by the butcher in this way would feel scared, or at least a little uneasy or cold. But Jun Mo's expression did not change at all. "The drunkard is dead," Jun Mo repeated calmly. He was not deliberately pointing out the fact and a key point to provoke the butcher. He was just stating an objective fact, including the next sentence. "You will die too." The butcher frowned slightly and said, "How?" Jun Mo said, "We all know that you and the drunkard are afraid of death. That's why you have lived for so many years. But his death proves that he was wrong. If you don't want to die, you should take a different path from him." The butcher said, he followed the Abbey Dean, and I guarded the Taoist gate. That's different. Jun Mo said, there are thousands of paths in the world, not just these two. The butcher said, what else? Jun Mo said, how do you choose the crossroads? Which side do you put your chips on? If the two paths don't work, there is a third one. Hao Tian has returned to Chang'an. You have no reason not to choose this path. Logically, according to my fear of death, I should choose this path. I have never seen Hao Tian in the divine kingdom, but I have seen her in the human world. I have received a promise from her, but, the butcher paused for a moment and said, I don't want to choose this path. Jun Mo vaguely guessed what he was thinking. He bowed respectfully again and said, please enlighten me. The butcher's hand that held the hilt slightly loosened or tightened, just like his voice. He said firmly and calmly, cultivators who know me in the drunkard always think that he is a relatively carefree person, while I am a relatively bloodthirsty and cruel person. But in fact, I have rarely killed in the past tens of thousands of years. Jun Mo said, indeed. The butcher said, I don't kill because I am afraid of death. I am really afraid. But I only have one companion. He was killed by the academy. I have to do something for him. Jun Mo was silent. The butcher said, because I am his only companion. Jun Mo was still silent. After a long while, he said, that makes sense. It did make sense. For people like the drunkard and the butcher, if not for each other's companions, they would have been lost in the endless journey of cultivation. No one could bear that kind of loneliness. Fortunately, they could be companions. They were each other's only companions. If the butcher did not do something for the drunkard, no one else would. Jun Mo thought the butcher's words made sense, so he stopped trying to persuade him. He had always respected reason. He took out the perfectly straight iron sword and said, please. The butcher raised the greasy butcher's knife and said, I will cut a way out. There was no way out, so he had to cut a way out. The butcher raised his knife and cut towards Jun Mo. There was no movement or skill. You could not even feel the aura of heaven and earth on the knife. It looked like, a simple cut. Of course, it was not a simple cut. If someone cut thousands of people with a butcher's knife every day for more than 300 days every year, how many times had he cut for tens of thousands of years? No one had done it. Only the butcher did it. And only he could do it. Because he had lived long enough, so he had cultivated for a long time. It was said that cultivation depended on talent and diligence. The butcher's talent in cultivation was naturally one of the best in history. His diligence was also one of the best. What did it mean when the two were combined? Thousands multiplied by 300 and then tens of thousands. How many cuts would it be? It meant that this cut was invincible. Even if Lu Bai came back to life, he would not be able to take it. And the Abbey Dean would not want to take it. Except for Kuharan, no one could take the butcher's knife. Jun Mo's eyes lit up. He knew what this cut meant. The two words were dazzling. The youngest uncle was his idol. He wanted to take it. If his arms were intact, he might take it. But now he only had one arm. One end of the iron sword was in his hand, and the other end was in the snow. That was the rootless willow. The light in his eyes dimmed, and then brightened again. Everything was calm again. Jun Mo took a step back. He held the iron sword upside down, lifted his knee, and kicked upwards with his left foot. This kick was aimed at the sky. It was called the sky-kicking kick. He kicked the head of the iron sword. The iron sword whistled through the air, but it did not leave. It was like a bowstring. One end of the bowstring was in his hand, and the other end was under his feet. The iron knife hit the iron sword. The bowstring was bent, but not broken. The iron sword was like a bowstring. Jun Mo was like an arrow. He retreated like lightning, retreating hundreds of feet along the long street. In the end, he did not choose to take the butcher's knife. Because tonight, he was not fighting alone. He was the proud Jun Mo, but he was also the second brother of the academy. However, the butcher's knife intent was so horrible that it still followed him. With a horrible sound, the iron sword bent sharply. Finally, it touched his crown. His hair had not yet returned to its original length, but tonight he was wearing the ancient crown again. The crown was like a boat, helping him sail in the huge waves of the aura of heaven and earth, without turning sideways or capsizing. Jun Mo continued to retreat, out of the town, and under the cliff. The saber intent was still there. With a swish, a clear crack appeared on his chest, and a deep mark appeared on his iron sword. This iron sword, at the bottom of the giant sinkhole in the western wilderness, had led the serfs to fight against the Xiankong temple for several years. It had never been broken, but was later repaired. Tonight, it was almost cut by the butcher's knife. What a horrible knife! It was indeed invincible. Jun Mo retreated to the cliff. His right foot fell, and the sky-kicking kick became like a pine, nailed to the ground, and no longer retreated. The butcher also arrived. Different from what people thought, the butcher's speed was not too slow. Jun Mo's lips were overflowing with blood. Looking at the second knife that broke through the night, his expression was extremely calm. He could not block the butcher's knife. He retreated hundreds of feet, but he was still injured. But he wanted the butcher to come here. A shrill cicada sounded. It seemed that a huge cicada opened its transparent wings in front of the cliff. It happened to cover the place where the butcher stood. The butcher entered the world of cicada wings, which was completely isolated from the world of Haotian. Even the grand cultivators who had surpassed the 5 states could not create their own world, especially the world made of 2 transparent cicada wings, which seemed to be indestructible. Cold cicada can't trap me. The butcher's beard and hair were flying. With a roar, he chopped at the transparent world barrier. A sharp sound rang out. A crack appeared on the transparent cicada wings. I also want to name this chapter, The Butcher's Knife. There is another chapter. Chapter 1148. The knife was very thick and covered in oil and blood. When it slashed at the falling snowflakes, there was a sense of disharmony, as if it would slash into thin air in the next moment. That was because there was nothing in the air in front of the cliff other than snow. Yet when the knife slashed down, one could clearly see the distortion of space and hear the sound of something being torn apart. The world formed by 2 transparent cicada wings was broken by a simple knife. The saber's will did not stop there. It fell on the cliff, and with a cracking sound, rocks flew into the snow, and the cracks between the pine vines gradually widened. The cliff slowly slid, and countless rocks tumbled down. Then, the mountain cracked. Butcher's knife had cut a mountain in half. Along with the rocks, a person fell. That person was very petite. Falling from the cliff that was hundreds of feet high, it was as if she had jumped from the sky into the snow. In an instant, she was on top of Butcher's head. Butcher's knife intent had just landed, and even he could not slash a 3rd time in such a short time. He gave a low roar, flipped his wrist, and held the knife horizontally in the snow. There was a muffled slap. That petite figure landed directly on the surface of the knife. There was a loud boom. Smoke and dust rose. In the wind and snow, rocks flew everywhere. Butcher's eyebrows moved violently and fell down bit by bit. But he did not fall. That was because his feet had sunk into the ground, up to his knees. That petite figure was sent flying by Butcher's knife. She tapped lightly on the broken cliff and turned back like a goose. At the same time, the sword in Jun Mo's hand also arrived. Kaboom! The deafening sound of the collision directly destroyed several residences at the edge of the small town, and tore the snow in front of the broken mountain into powder. It even went straight into the night sky and tore a hole in the clouds. The aura of heaven and earth caused by the collision was turbulent everywhere, pulling the snow on the ground and the rocks piled up everywhere into the air. In the darkness of the night, only sounds could be heard, and nothing could be seen. No one knew how many times the three had fought in such a short time, how many times the iron sword, butcher's knife, and fists had collided. They only knew that it represented absolute power. After an unknown amount of time, the cliff finally quieted down. Last time, I said that you are indeed very strong. If you have the same amount of time as me, you might even surpass me. But, now, you can't. You can't even kill me. Butcher looked at the bottom of the opposite cliff with an indifferent expression. There were many wounds on his body, but no blood could be seen. He seemed to be in a sorry state, but he was not really injured. No wonder he was the one who was closest to the legendary immortal realm. There was a bloody wound on Junmo's left shoulder, and Yu Lian's yellow dress was covered in dust. Most importantly, her shoes were torn. All these signs proved that it was still difficult for them to kill the butcher. Some people are indeed hard to kill, such as you, the drunkard, and the chief monk. But tonight, the drunkard died, and the chief monk was trapped to death by the academy. We have a plan for you. Yu Lian said calmly, I was just trying. Since it didn't work, I'll try something else. You have to know that you don't necessarily have to kill your enemy to defeat him. This sentence made a lot of sense. Jun Mo thought as he recalled Butcher's first slash. As Yu Lian's voice faded away, a clear sound of a flute was heard among the snowflakes on the cliff. Following the sound of the flute was the sound of the zither, which sounded like flowing water. The zither and the flute were playing together, and the sound was moving. However, there was killing intent in the silence. The butcher slightly raised his eyebrows, and his face was slightly pale. He shouted, and the dust and snow were shaken up from his body. He held the knife and chopped toward the sound of the zither and the flute. The sound of the zither and the flute stopped abruptly. But the intent of the knife could not move forward. Because there was a pine on the cliff, a short pine. There was a broken carriage beside the pine, and a broken flag on the broken carriage. The short pine was a cannon, the broken carriage was still a carriage, and the broken flag was a marshal's flag. This was chess. The intent of the knife was locked, and the butcher looked slightly serious. He took a step forward and smashed Yu Lian's cicada wings with his own body, but he could not get out, because there were still many chess pieces on the cliff. The cliff stones were black, and the cliff stones were covered with snow. Those were the black and white chess pieces. This was chess. The butcher gave a long roar, and chopped again. The sound of the zither and the flute stopped again, and the chess pieces on the mountain were shaking uneasily, as if they were about to break. At this moment, an extremely soft silk thread floated down along with the snowflakes. The silk thread connected the pine, the carriage, the flag, the stones, and the snow together. The snowflakes touched the silk thread, and were flicked into powder, and became clouds. This was the gathering array. But it was not over. Outside the gathering array, there was an iron furnace, yellow sand, and even a water wheel in the stream behind the cliff. A white goose was squatting on the top of the water wheel, like a proud general. The old yellow bull was on a hill further away, looking into the distance, seemingly uninterested. The butcher whistled again, and chopped again. A finger intent came from the west. An iron cudgel entered the ground as a camp. The intent of the knife was bound by several layers of array intent, and then was hit by the finger intent and the cudgel, dispersing into nothingness. Chen Pipi and Tang Xiaotang came from outside the town. He wore a divine robe and a divine crown, and his expression was solemn. He had the 13 apostles of the new stream, and the power of faith. The butcher was silent, lowered his head, and then raised it again. He raised the iron cudgel, and chopped for the 5th time. However, this time, he still could not hit anyone. Because a stone appeared in front of the cudgel. The cliff stones all over the mountain seemed to have come alive, and then died, trapping him in it. This was the Great Blockage Formation. Mo Shanshan wore a white dress, and a crown, quietly looking at the rocks all over the mountain. The Great Blockage Formation that she had set now was 70% similar to the Daming Lake in front of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Back then, it took youngest uncle some time to break the Great Blockage Formation, so how could the butcher be an exception? The butcher finally put away his cudgel. He looked at the several powerful but interdependent arrays on the cliff, and remained silent. He could predict that everyone from the academy would appear here. But he did not expect that the other party would move the academy here. The zither and flute sounded again, extremely joyful, and even a little proud. Yu Lian did not even look at the butcher, and turned to leave with her hands behind her back. The people from the academy followed her, and Mo Shanshan was no exception. She was one of the 2 people invited to the back of the mountain by the academy. She had long been used to treating herself as a member of the academy, and the academy had long been used to treating her as one of their own. Jun Mo did not stay. He sat cross-legged in the snow. He quietly looked at the butcher in the array. Many years ago, when Ning Ke killed Xia Ho, he sat on the snow bridge for a whole night, so that the Defender General of the Tang Empire, Su Shi, and the most powerful Yulin royal guards could not cross the bridge. Tonight, he sat in the snow again, which represented his attitude. The butcher looked at him and said, "As long as there is time, I can break these arrays." Jun Mo said, "We also need time. If you can break these arrays, then it will be my turn to stop you. Then I will try to see if I can catch your cutlass." The butcher said, "You can't." Jun Mo said, "Maybe." The butcher was silent for a moment, and then asked, "Why did you wait for more than 10 days on the Peach Mountain? If Haotian Taoism is destroyed, she will become very weak, or even die." Jun Mo was silent for a moment, and then said, "Maybe it is because the Haotian in your eyes is also the little girl who cooks in the academy. If she can live, it is better for her not to die." The butcher asked, "Why do you want to go to the Peach Mountain tonight?" Jun Mo said, "Because she has returned to Chang'an." Chang'an, what a wonderful name. It was a magical city that could protect many ordinary people, and now it was going to protect Haotian. Jun Mo said again, "You do your best for your friends, and I do my best for the sect. Let's do our best for each other." The butcher was silent for a long time, and then said, "Jun Mo has always been reasonable." He raised the cutlass in his hand again. The cutlass could not break the array, but it faintly resonated with the cutlass left in the air. The snow clouds in the night sky had been cut open, and at this moment, the gap quickly expanded. The snowflakes gradually stopped, and the clouds dispersed, revealing the bright moon. Jun Mo looked up at the bright moon. On the mountain road to the Peach Mountain, the people of the academy carrying poles, cows, white geese, and belongings, and hurried forward in silence. They had left the verdant canyon, and now they were going up the west hill. Yu Lian seemed to feel something, and looked up at the night sky. She also saw the bright moon. "Teacher, we will win." Chen Pipi looked at the moon and said with a smile. Many years ago, the headmaster went up to the Peach Mountain and cut all the peach blossoms. Tonight, the bright moon was in the sky. His students had arrived. Jun Mo has always been reasonable. I always write well at critical moments. I silently praise myself. Chapter 1149. In the early morning, the sun had not yet risen from the East Sea. The sky was dim and gloomy like a rainy day, making the mountain seem lonely. There were 3 plateaus on the mountain, 4 divine halls, thousands of divine priests, and tens of thousands of deacons and cavalrymen. This was the temple where Haotian Taoism had ruled the world for countless years. It was also the holy land in the hearts of all believers of Haotian. At this time, there were tens of thousands of people on the cliff plateau, including divine priests in red and black robes, deacons in black robes, and cavalrymen in black and gold armors. They were everywhere, but there was no sound. Even the sound of breathing could not be heard. The crowd was like a silent ocean. There might be anger in the depths of the ocean, but nothing could be seen on the surface. All the bubbles were blown into nothingness by the morning wind. There were old and devout divine priests in red, and there were resolute and indifferent cavalry commanders. No matter who they were, or how many years they had lived in this divine hall, they were all silent. Their expressions were complicated. They were angry, sad, confused, and almost desperate. That was why there was a deathly silence. Haotian Taoism was the most powerful religion since the awakening of human beings. The divine hall was the most solemn and sacred place of human beings. The people here had ruled the world for countless years under the will of Haotian. They had enjoyed endless glory and all kinds of beautiful things, and had an unimaginable status. Was it all going to be destroyed? The people on the plateau looked down the mountain. In the fields and hills at the foot of the mountain, there was also a silent black ocean in the dim morning light. But that ocean was different from the black ocean in the mountain. There was no sense of sadness or helplessness, but only a vague accumulated power, a terrifying power. That black ocean was the black armored cavalry of the Tang Empire. They were invincible in the world. Tens of thousands of black armored cavalrymen surrounded Peach Mountain. No one could escape except for the real grand cultivators. Someone looked at the end of the mountain path where there was a sacred sedan. Behind the veil was a woman in a red robe and a divine crown. She was the great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu. In the past, the great divine priest of judgment was the most reliable psychological support for the tens of thousands of divine priests and deacons in the divine halls of West Hill. They believed that as long as she was there, no one would dare to disrespect the divine halls of West Hill. But now, the great divine priest of judgment was standing on the opposite side of the divine halls. Some people looked at the people carrying loads and spatulas on the north side of the mountain path. Some looked at the old ox, and some looked at the goose. They knew that they were the legendary disciples of the academy. But most of them just stared at one person. That person was not the great divine priest of West Hill, but he was wearing a divine robe and a divine crown. His chubby body seemed to have the most solemn aura in the world. People knew that he was Chen Pipi, the most talented figure of the new generation of Taoism and the son of the Abbey Dean. But now he was the hierarch of the new stream. Yi Hongyu and Chen Pipi, in a sense, were the biggest traders in the history of Taoism. And Cheng Li Xue, who brought the old members of the divine halls of revelation back to Peach Mountain, knew Taoism and the divine halls of West Hill too well. If it were not for them, how could the array of clear light in front of Peach Mountain suddenly lose its effect in the darkness before dawn? People looked at them with mixed feelings. But most of the people on the cliff plateau did not look at them. Instead, they were looking at the petite figure standing at the end of the mountain path in front of the divine halls of Haotian. She looked like a fairy in the morning breeze. She used to be called Lin Wu, but now she was called Yu Lian. She also had another name, 23-year cicada. She was the current suzerain of Devil's Doctrine, but now she was standing at the top of Peach Mountain, which was the biggest insult to the divine halls of West Hill. Taoism and Devil's Doctrine were irreconcilable. For thousands of years, she was the first suzerain of Devil's Doctrine to stand in front of the divine halls of West Hill. Looking at the girl-like figure, people in the divine halls of West Hill had mixed feelings. But Yu Lian did not show any emotion. She did not even look at the divine halls, but somewhere in the north. Wasn't this kind of disregard a kind of humiliation? It was just that, the Tang Empire's cavalry had wiped out the West Hill Divine Kingdom, but Taoism had kept most of its strength and retreated to the top of Peach Mountain in advance. At this time, there were still thousands of divine priests and deacons on the cliff plateau. When the morning sun rose, the sunlight fell on the peak and lit up people's clothes, forming a sea of red and black. Coupled with the tens of thousands of cavalrymen, how could the academy, Yi Hongyu, Qing Lixue, and the others easily break through? Moreover, in the divine halls of Haotian, there was Zhao Nanhai who was at the peak of knowing destiny, the middle-aged priest whom they could not see clearly, and the glorious hierarch Xiong Chumo. The morning sun was covered by the clouds over the sea, and only a little light leaked through. As the cold wind blew on Peach Mountain, it became even dimmer. The solemn white divine hall suddenly became cold. A huge sacred sedan slowly moved out of the divine hall. The middle-aged priest and Zhao Nanhai silently walked to the front of the sedan. However, even though the curtain of the sedan was shining brightly, it still could not brighten up the dark peak. Yu Lian turned around and looked at the sedan emotionlessly. On the cliff plateau, countless pairs of eyes were also looking at the sedan. Whether it was the hierarch in the sedan, Zhao Nanhai, or the middle-aged priest, they were all powerful enough to fight against the academy. The middle-aged priest slowly walked toward Yu Lian. Countless pairs of eyes followed him. The divine priests and deacons became nervous, but they could feel their blood boiling. They knew that the battle was about to begin. Yu Lian folded her hands behind her back and looked at him, still emotionless. The middle-aged priest walked through the sea of divine priests and deacons and stopped 10 feet away from Yu Lian. He tidied up his robe and said something. "We are willing to surrender." The Peach Mountain was in a dead silence. Those from the divine halls of West Hill were shocked speechless. Those who followed Yi Hongyu and Qing Lixue were also shocked speechless. Until a moment later, a tearful curse was suddenly heard on the cliff plateau. Xiong Chumo, F***CKU. People on the cliff plateau knew clearly that the middle-aged priest was not acting on his own. His decision must have been approved by the hierarch Lord, Zhao Nanhai, and other bigwigs from the divine halls. The war between Taoism and the academy had lasted for thousands of years. Countless people had died during the war. How many tragic scenes had there been? Although Taoism was on the losing side in today's final battle, they still had years of accumulation. Obviously, they still had the power to fight again. But the leaders of Taoism were surrendering. The crowd became enraged, and curses could be heard without end. In their grief and indignation, they no longer cared about the middle-aged Taoist or even the hierarch status. Some of the pious old heavenly officials began to weep. Countless shoes and stones flew out from the crowd and landed on the middle-aged Taoist like raindrops. The middle-aged priest seemed to feel nothing. He just looked at Yu Lian quietly. He had made the most difficult decision on behalf of the divine halls of West Hill. He believed that the academy would respond appropriately. Yu Lian did not expect to hear such a sentence. She didn't even think before saying, "You're not allowed to surrender." There was more today. Chapter 1150. It was unbelievable that the divine halls of West Hill wanted to surrender. The entire Peach Mountain was in an uproar. Cries and curses were heard everywhere. However, Yu Lian said no surrender on behalf of the academy. It was even more unbelievable. The Peach Mountain fell into a dead silence. The middle-aged priest frowned and stared at Yu Lian for a long time. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Why?" From the perspective of the West Hill Divine Palace, there was no reason for the academy not to accept their surrender, because Haotian Taoism was still very powerful. The reason why the Divine Hall was willing to surrender was that the real leader of Haotian Taoism, the hierarch lord, who seemed to be very tall in the light, had no desire to fight. To put it more precisely, Xiong Chumo's whereabouts were exposed by Yu Lian years ago in the back of the mountain of the academy. After that, the radiance could no longer cover the little thing in his robe. After the Abbey Dean left the Peach Mountain and Yi Hongyu jumped into the abyss, he could no longer suppress his fear. He did not understand what was wrong with the world. Why did Haotian abandon Taoism, or why did Taoism abandon Haotian? After a long struggle, Xiong Chumo decided to surrender. All he wanted was to survive. Maybe the academy and the great Tang could give him a high position. Wasn't war always like this? Zhao Nanhai and other bigwigs from the divine halls were either convinced or suppressed by him. The middle-aged priest did not object either. The West Hill Divine Palace's decision to surrender must have gone through a complicated process and even a bloody struggle. But if Yu Lian had thought about it for a while, she might have figured it out. The problem was, after listening to the middle-aged Taoist's words, she calmly and coldly refused. Why? Yu Lian did not answer the middle-aged priest because she did not need to. The divine halls of West Hill would definitely put forward some conditions. For example, Xiong Chumo, the middle-aged priest, Zhao Nanhai, He Mingqi, and many others must live. She and Ning Ke would never accept these conditions. So she would not allow them to surrender. The morning breeze blew her yellow dress and black ponytail gently swayed. Her hands were still behind her back. The middle-aged priest looked at the Grand Master who looked like a little girl and felt cold. There was no surrender, but there was a battle. The battle between the academy and Taoism that had lasted for thousands of years was finally coming to an end. Countless people on the plateau looked at the radiant chariot. The figure of the hierarch lord in the carriage was as tall as it had been for decades. At this moment, he was the spiritual sustenance of tens of thousands of people from the West Hill Divine Palace. There were many powerhouses from Haotian Taoism on the cliff plateau. As long as the hierarch could fight against Yu Lian, the divine hall still had hope. The outcome of this thousand-year war, no matter who won or lost, would definitely be unparalleled. This battle would definitely last for a very long time. It would be normal to fight from dawn to dusk. The fourth brother placed the hourglass on the stone. He habitually used calculation to arrange the strategy. A thick incense was lit in the divine hall of Haotian. Perhaps it was meaningless to worship the heaven now, but it could still be used to calm the mind. A bright red flower was blooming in the peach mountain. Under everyone's gaze, Yi Hongyu walked to the cliff platform and looked at the huge sacred sedan in front of the divine hall. Her blood-red robe of judgment swayed in the wind. She didn't need to say anything. Everyone knew what she meant. Peach Mountain was in an uproar. She wanted to fight with Xiong Chumo. The figure in the divine chariot was as majestic as a mountain, unmoving. Zhao Nanhai stood in front of the chariot with an indifferent expression. The great divine priest of the South Sea was a powerhouse at the peak of the knowing destiny state. He was qualified to fight with Yi Hongyu. Behind Zhao Nanhai, there were a dozen powerhouses from the South Sea. Two of them were at the knowing destiny state. The powerhouses from the academy were Yu Lian, Yi Hongyu, Chen Pipi, and Tang Xiaotang. The middle-aged priest glanced at Yu Lian and walked back to the giant sedan. In terms of the number and quality of the powerhouses, the divine halls of West Hill was not weaker than them. Yu Lian understood the meaning of the middle-aged priest's glance, but she didn't care. There was no extra emotion on her young face. She didn't want to explain what the real powerhouses were. As far as she knew, Jun Mo, youngest brother, and Yi Hongyu were very powerful. Since she wanted to fight, then let her fight. There wouldn't be any surprises. She even felt a little bored. So she looked to the north again, just like before, as if there was something worth paying attention to there. A cool morning breeze rose and wrinkled her thin eyebrows. The West Hill Divine Kingdom was some distance away from the East Sea. But the wind here usually came from the sea, and it was usually the east wind. The breeze in the morning light was also the east wind. At this moment, the wind that brushed against his face came from the far north. Yu Lian's expression changed slightly. Her young face somehow turned pale. She turned around and looked at the giant sedan in front of the divine hall of Haotian. Her black ponytail swayed, drawing two black shadows in the gloomy sky. Her younger brothers and sisters noticed something wrong with her mood and were surprised. Tang Xiaotang asked, "Teacher, what happened?" Yu Lian said, "I want to leave." She looked calm when she said this, and her voice didn't tremble. But everyone could hear her anxiety and anger, and there was no doubt in her voice. The final battle was about to begin. As the most powerful senior sister in the academy, she had to leave. What about the next battle? The academy and the Tang Empire were about to win. Were they going to leave? Yu Lian's sudden decision was out of everyone's expectation. But no one objected, because they had already guessed something and their expressions changed. At this moment, a trace of ruthlessness flashed across Yu Lian's young face. Then she took a breath. A gust of wind rose on the cliff plateau. Her chest suddenly swelled, as if she was going to suck in all the air in the Peach Mountain. Her face suddenly turned pale, as if she was seriously injured. Her eyes suddenly brightened, but the corners of her eyes began to bleed, which looked extremely horrible. It was not the wind, but the aura of heaven and earth in the Peach Mountain. It kept pouring into her body as she breathed. There was a strange phenomenon between heaven and earth. The green trees on the Peach Mountain kept swaying, throwing down the snow. Yi Hongyu turned around and looked at the cliff. She was slightly shocked. Even if you are the 23-year cicada cultivation and your body is as hard as a rock, how can you absorb so much aura of heaven and earth in such a short time? The aura of heaven and earth was still pouring into Yu Lian's body. The horrible amount of aura collided, breaking the corners of her eyes and loosening her ponytail. Her black hair scattered like a waterfall and danced with the wind from the north. The wind calmed down. It was not until then that people saw clearly that her black hair was growing longer. However, no matter how long her black hair grew, it still hung between her knees like before. Because she was growing taller. The childishness on Yu Lian's face gradually faded. But her aura gradually rose until it was majestic. In a few breaths, she turned from a little girl into a young girl. Looking at this scene, the middle-aged Taoist gradually became serious. He had read the Sha hand scroll of the tomes of arcane and knew that many cultivation sects in the world had their own secret methods. Taoism also had a secret method to obtain great power by burning one's life. But he had never heard of a secret method that could let a person go through a long time. If Ning Ke were on the cliff plateau, he would immediately recognize the method Yu Lian used, because he had the fragments of Lian Xing's consciousness in his sense of perception. More importantly, he had seen Xia Ho age dozens of years instantly on the snow lake. This was the secret of the devil's doctrine. In an instant, Yu Lian lost 10 years of time. She turned those years, or rather, her life, into power. What was beautiful was that there was no white hair in the human world. She used to be a very childish girl. 10 years later, she had become a woman with a gentle expression but a biting cold expression between her brows. Yu Lian reached out to the air. Tang Xiaotang handed the iron rod to her. She held the two ends of the iron rod and slowly stroked it. The sharpness slowly reappeared, shining with cold light. The wind came from the north again, as if it was urging something. She did not take advantage of the east wind and disappeared when the north wind came. There was a bluestone road between the cliff and the divine hall. With countless cracking sounds, countless cracks appeared on the bluestone path as it split apart inch by inch. Yu Lian had already arrived in front of the divine hall. She came to the front of the giant sedan. Zhao Nanhai was in front of the sedan. The descendant of light from the South Sea was burning with holy fire in his hands. He looked solemn as he slapped at her. Yu Lian did not even look at him, nor did she stop walking. She directly crashed into the wall of fire. Her speed was so fast that the space seemed to be deformed. The blazing Haotian divine light brought out two flames. They were like the wings of a firebird. In fact, they were the wings of a cicada. That was her world. It was dark in front of the divine hall. Even the light of the hierarch's sedan could not illuminate it. A muffled sound. It was like a meteorite falling from the sky. After flying for more than 100 days, it finally landed on the ground. Even the earth was about to crack, let alone a human. Zhao Nanhai was smashed into pieces of flesh and blood. Then, he was purified into smoke by the Haotian's divine flame. After he died, the Haotian's divine flame was still there. It even burned his body. This could only mean that Yu Lian's speed had reached an unimaginable level. Fear shrouded the cliff yard in front of the divine hall. The divine priest from the South Sea wanted to shout. The pale Xiaoyu was about to sit down. But before anything happened, Yu Lian entered the huge sedan. The light suddenly shook, as if it would be extinguished at any time. Xiong Chumo's angry roar came from the sedan. He was prepared for this old rival and did not dare to take it lightly. In an instant, he entered the Tianqi state. The prevalence of the new stream had directly weakened Haotian in the human world. Although Haotian in the divine kingdom had become much weaker, the power he obtained from the Tianqi was still as strong as before. The roar came from the sedan. Then, the sedan was suddenly smashed. The 76 gauze curtains hanging on the sedan danced with the wind and went straight into the sky. When the gauze fell, the smoke and dust also dispersed. The real scene was revealed. Yu Lian stood there quietly with blood dripping from the corner of her mouth. Xiong Chumo stood in front of her. There was no wound on his body. It was the first time for the divine priests from the West Hill to see the hierarch's face. The skinny, short and ugly old priest surprised them. But they were more interested to know the result of the battle. Yu Lian turned around. A clear cut appeared on Xiong Chumo's body. Then the second cut, the third cut, the breath of death splashed. His Taoist robe was torn into pieces. Countless cuts appeared, some deep and some shallow. In the end, there were tens of thousands of cuts. Xiong Chumo knelt down. He was covered in blood, but he was still alive. He looked at the figure of the woman who was leaving. He clutched his chest in pain, feeling his heart that was cut into petals by the sword was breaking. His eyes were full of despair and confusion. Why? How could you be so fast? How did you manage to slash out 13,362 times in such a short period of time? Why didn't you accept my surrender? Why would you so resolutely and valiantly choose to perish indiscriminately, even if you might be seriously injured? Why were you so anxious? Why was I afraid in the end? Why were you the 23-year cicada cultivation? Why did the world need me when you exist? Yu Lian did not know what Xiong Chumo was thinking while kneeling on the ground. She did not care what he was thinking. She thought differently from Xiong Chumo. Although Taoism and diabolism were irreconcilable, she never regarded him as a lifelong enemy. Because she had always looked down on him. How could he be worthy of her? She walked to the edge of the cliff, glanced at the middle-aged priest, and then jumped off. At this moment, the hourglass on the edge of the cliff was just dripping some sand. The incense in the divine hall of Haotian had only burned a small part. Peach Mountain was in silence. Dead silence. No one spoke, because no one knew what to say. No one shouted, because people were already numb from the shock. Everyone thought the war between the academy and Taoism would last for a long time. However, what had just happened? People thought they were crazy. Otherwise, how could the war end in an instant? How could such a thing happen in the world? The middle-aged priest looked at the edge of the cliff where Yu Lian jumped off. He remained silent. He understood the meaning of her eyes. She killed Xiong Chumo and then Zhao Nanhai. Now, the divine halls of West Hill could surrender. Of course, there were others who had to die too. Xiong Chumo was not dead yet. Maybe I should thank her for leaving you to me. Yi Hongyu looked at him covered in blood and fell silent. She did not say anything else. She turned around and walked to the edge of the cliff. She looked at the rising sun in the direction of the East Sea. It took countless years to build the divine halls of West Hill. But it only took one morning to destroy it. Peach Mountain glowed red in the morning light. Even the snow on the ground turned red. The rising sun was as red as blood. The night is coming to an end. I am very reluctant. Silence, the ending will be great. Double monthly votes. Please vote if you want. It has nothing to do with the list. It is a matter of emotion. This is the last time. Silence. Thank you. I will work hard in the next 2 or 3 days. Thank you. Chapter 1151. Yu Lian jumped down from the Peach Mountain and headed north. Naturally, she had to pass by the small town. At that time, the butcher was still waving his knife in the array. Jun Mo was looking at the north with a pale face. No one knew what he was thinking. Then he saw her yellow dress. Just like his peers on the cliff plateau, Jun Mo knew what happened between her and him. He was even more certain that something had happened to the eldest brother in the north. After a moment of silence, he sat back in the snow. If she could change the ending of the story, it was enough for her to go. No one could catch up with her. If she could not change the ending of the story, it was enough for her to go. It was better not to let others see her mourning. Jun Mo thought so. Even himself. Yu Lian kept running. The embroidered shoes on her feet had long been torn into shreds. Her bare feet were as white as jade. She stepped on the snow and muddy water, shaking the entire earth. The yellow dress was like a yellow leaf that kept flying, but never fell off the branches. Because it was not a withered leaf that fell in autumn, but a leaf that had ripened early and was still full of life in late spring. In the fields of the West Hill Divine Kingdom, in the hills outside Lingang City in the South Jin Kingdom, among the reeds, the yellow dress kept flashing. It did not take long for her to reach hundreds of miles away. Then she continued heading north. The yellow dress appeared on the slightly cold Great Swamp. It broke through the cold wind, the fog, and the fog of her life. Her bare feet stepped on the rippling lake, leaving unerasable traces. Yu Lian went all the way to the north. She wanted to cross thousands of miles to see how he was doing. So fast. The Abbey Dean looked at somewhere far away in the south and sighed. Then he turned around and looked at the depths of the cliff. He said, "But you know, she can't be faster than us." Yu Lian could cover several miles in one step. No one in the world could be faster than her. However, after the drunkard's death, there was still the Abbey Dean and the eldest brother. They were grand cultivators who had mastered the distanceless state. The eldest brother sat in the pile of rocks. His chest was covered with blood and his face was pale. The wooden cudgel that was held horizontally in front of his eyebrows 2 days ago was still in his hand. But it was drooping to his side. Obviously, he had failed. He could not even lift the cudgel in his hand. Naturally, he could not keep the Abbey Dean in this snowy mountain far away from the human world. Not even half of the initial 7 days had passed, but there was no sign of defeat on eldest senior brother's face. Instead, he looked very calm. The Abbey Dean was the first in the world, and he was the second. It was a matter of course that the second could not defeat the first. The academy was particular about the matter of course, so there was no need to regret or be angry. Haotian returned to Chang'an, and the academy went to the West Hill. You once said that a just cause enjoys abundant support. Now it seems that we have the real Tao after all. Dean said, the Abbey Dean and Abbey Dean. Jun Dean is Abbey Lian. The Tao is the reason, and we have the reason, so why can't we win? Abbey Dean is right. To Tao. The way. Way. And is. The Dean is the way. He Dean King has king. The sect is right with the sect. He has sect. The Lien. I she. The Abbey Dean looked at him and said calmly, as for Haotian, she went back to Chang and with Ning Quebec. But you should know that my way is not right. He had said something similar to the eldest brother some time ago. The eldest brother looked very serious at that time because it meant that Chang and could protect Ning Ke, but not Sang Sang. Or was it because of the 7 tomes of arcane? Before I left the Peach Mountain, I understood one thing. Taoism and the Academy are the same. Why? Because people are the combination of all social relationships, and the world is the combination of all people's consciousness. The world is what people think, and Haotian was born in this way. The Abbey Dean looked at him and continued, but the Academy thinks that it represents the interests of the majority, and I think I represent the interests of the majority. The eldest brother said, shouldn't this be decided by people themselves? The Abbey Dean said, otherwise, humans don't know what they want. The eldest brother disagreed and said, so you can impose your will on them? The Abbey Dean said, how do parents discipline their children? The eldest brother said, but we are not human parents. You have to know that. Moreover, no one wants to have another parent to discipline them. The Abbey Dean said, I love people, whether they love me or not. The eldest brother said after a long silence, I can't be sure that the headmaster and we are right. But I can be sure that your way is wrong. Maybe. The Abbey Dean felt the rumbling coming from the south and knew that the girl in the yellow dress was getting closer. He turned around and walked down the cliff, disappearing into the void in the next moment. The eldest brother looked at his back and said, I am still alive. The battle without any bystanders had already been decided. But it seemed that it would not be a life and death battle. Why? The Abbey Dean smiled and said nothing. The eldest brother understood. Those who pursued eternity were afraid of loneliness. The one who would not kill the second in the world was the first in the world. In life, no matter eternal or long, the most important thing was to have companions. Or in other words, opponents who could understand each other. The drunkard and the butcher were such people. The Abbey Dean believed that his idea was correct. So he had to prove it to others. For whom? Who was qualified to see it? Of course, only Li Man was qualified. In fact, you should know very well that the main purpose of this battle is to get the Ming hand scroll. Killing Sang Sang was very important to the Abbey Dean. But to get Sang Sang's divinity, collecting the 7 volumes of the arcane tomes was the most important thing. Taoism kept 6 volumes of the arcane tomes, and the last one was always in the hands of the Academy. It was tied to the eldest brother's waist. The Abbey Dean had to defeat him if he wanted to collect the 7 volumes. The eldest brother said, yes, so I did not bring the Ming hand scroll with me. From the very beginning of the battle, he knew that he would definitely lose to the Abbey Dean. So he would not bring the Ming hand scroll with him. That was equivalent to giving it to the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean said, it doesn't matter. Because you are the arcane tomes. As long as I defeat you, who in the world can stop me from getting the Ming hand scroll? The meadow in the front yard of the Academy was still green in the deep winter. The peach blossoms transplanted from the Peach Mountain were in full bloom, as if they had become cold-resistant wintersweet. Or was it because they were welcoming the arrival of their former master? The Abbey Dean appeared in front of the Academy in a fluttering indigo robe and walked inside. No one could stop him. The female mathematics professor holding the bamboo broom fell to the ground. Professor Huang He, who was still recovering, could not move at all. The cloud-gathering array was broken without any wind. The Abbey Dean came to the cliff yard in the back mountain of the Academy. There was no yellow ox, no white goose, and no water wheel on the stream. There was only the mirror-like lake and the houses in the woods beside the lake. It was quiet but uninhabited. He stood quietly by the lake for a long time, feeling for a long time. He had never been to the back mountain of the Academy. This place was very meaningful to him. Then he left to find the arcane tomes. There was a place in the academy with the most books. It was a cliff cave. The Abbey Dean came to the cliff cave and found that there was someone else in the back mountain of the academy. It was a scholar. Writing slowly. There are more today. Chapter 1152. The cliff cave was very high and birds flew in and out of it. There was a 2-story wooden building on the gentle slope outside the cliff. There was a square desk in front of the building and a gray-haired old scholar behind the desk. Except for the headmaster of the academy, no one knew how long the old scholar had stayed in the back mountain of the academy. No one knew his name or how old he was. From Kuharan to Ningke, the people in the back mountain only knew that the old scholar had been reading, copying, reading and reciting books here all the time. The academy called him a scholar, and he was a scholar of the academy. The Abbey Dean stood in front of the desk and looked at the old scholar. He smelled the pungent smell of ink and Huangzhou bud paper. After a long silence, he suddenly laughed and sighed with emotion. This was the academy. "Hello," the Abbey Dean said to the scholar. The scholar seemed not to have heard him. He held an old book in his left hand and a half-bald brush in his right. He was murmuring something and occasionally wrote a few words on the paper, as if he was making annotations. The Abbey Dean raised his voice and asked, "Sir, have you seen an old book?" The scholar woke up and looked up at him. He looked confused and did not know what the Abbey Dean was talking about. Then he became more sober and felt inexplicably angry at being disturbed. His eyebrows moved wildly. The Abbey Dean was not angry. He gestured and said, "A very old book." The scholar thought for a moment, then picked up the half-bald brush in his hand and dipped it into the ink stone. Then, he wrote a character on the Huangzhou bud paper. His writing was as solemn as a mountain. The word was dripping with ink and full of meaning. It was a word, book. The scholar handed the paper to the Abbey Dean and said, "This is the book you wanted." The Abbey Dean looked at the paper and the word quietly. After a moment of silence, he said, "Interesting." He reached out to take the paper. His movement was very slow and solemn. It was really slow, like a moving mountain or the sky above the clouds. After a long time, his fingertips touched the slightly rough edge of the bud paper. With a light bang, the yellowish paper was burned. The paper burned slowly and the flame spread to both sides. The edge was burnt to ashes until it almost burned their fingers. The Abbey Dean did not let go and neither did the scholar. They looked at each other in silence. "I've read a lot of books too," the Abbey Dean suddenly said, "even though I'm not as obsessed with books as you are, I've lived for a long time, so I've read as many books as you." Time was a very important thing, whether it was studying or cultivating. The scholar did not speak. He looked at the burning paper in his hand. "Why isn't this scroll in Changpan?" Well, at that time, we were not sure if Ningke could return to Changpan. Without him, Changpan was indeed not as safe as the academy. The Abbey Dean looked at the scholar and said calmly, "Li Man was right to entrust the arcane tome to you for safekeeping. But it's meaningless, because a scholar is useless." As soon as he finished speaking, the paper was completely burned. There was nothing left in the scholar's fingers. The ashes fell slowly onto his shoes. However, there was still a piece of yellow paper in the Abbey Dean's fingers. The winner had been decided. The scholar looked at the mountain-like books on the table and the ocean-like inkstone. He was silent for a long time. It was the first time in his life that he doubted reading. The Abbey Dean walked into the cliff cave with his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at the bookshelves on both sides of the cliff cave, which were more than 100 feet high. He looked at the tens of millions of books on them and gently waved his sleeves. A gust of wind blew out from his sleeves. It was not slow but gentle in the cliff cave. The dust on the books was swept off and sent to a corner, leaving only a clean space. The Abbey Dean walked up the stairs and came to a row of bookshelves on the fourth floor. He took out a book from one of them, like a person who wanted to read a book at random without making any choices. That book was the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. The snow in Chang'an had stopped. The wind was calm, and the clouds were gone. The red sun shone on the world. The Abbey Dean appeared outside the city. This was the third time he came to Chang'an. Ning Ke was on the city wall the previous 2 times. Today was no exception. He looked at the Abbey Dean walking slowly in the snow and remained silent. He got the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane. Sang Sang said with a pale face, as if she was afraid. Ning Ke laughed, gathering the 7 Dragon Balls can summon the Dragon God. What can he do by gathering the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane? Summon Haotian? If he really wants to do that, just ignore him. He did not take off the iron bow on his shoulder because he had used up the primordial 13 arrows. He had a feeling that even with the help of the God-stunning array, the primordial 13 arrows could not threaten the Abbey Dean. The 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane were finally together. What did that mean? The Academy had been guessing and calculating this matter, but to no avail. No one knew the function of the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane except the Abbey Dean. Of course, Sang Sang knew it very well. How did I come about? You. You were born by your mother. Now is not the time for jokes. I am a little nervous. Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, you have to allow me to tell some jokes. Sang Sang said expressionlessly, I won't allow it. Well, if you mean Haotian, it is the combination of rules, born in chaos. No, I am the combination of objective rules and subjective beliefs of human beings. Then, I am the choice of human beings. Sang Sang turned to look at him and said, if so, when human beings chose me, why didn't they leave some means to keep me in check? Ning Ke was silent. He knew what Sang Sang said was true. Countless years ago, the gambler who founded Haotian Taoism made a bet on behalf of human beings. He gave the whole world to Haotian to protect. So it was very likely that he had set up a backup plan in advance. Legend had it that the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane in the Jishou Abbey were the crystallization of Haotian's will, or Haotian's gift to human beings. In fact, it was the real means of Haotian Taoism to control the world. With the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane, they could cancel the bet that happened countless years ago. They could invite Haotian out of the divine kingdom and let Haotian return to chaos. Only the master of Haotian Taoism could master this method. The current master of Haotian Taoism brought the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane to Chang'an City. Is this the last resort of Haotian Taoism? Ning Ke held the array pestle and asked the Abbey Dean under the city wall. The Abbey Dean said calmly, Kuharan said that we are dogs. Lotus said that we are dogs. People in the Academy and many others said that we are dogs of Haotian Taoism. But no one has ever thought that this iron chain is actually tied around our necks. Human beings are Haotian's dogs, and Haotian is also a human being's dog. He looked at Sang Sang beside Ning Ke and said, we worship you and give you endless years and even eternity. So you should be willing to be in eternal loneliness and protect the human world in the divine kingdom. You should not sneak into the human world for a night of pleasure. Don't you think it's reasonable? Sang Sang said nothing. Her face became paler and paler. Even when she was extremely weak in the past, she had never been so afraid. Because she could clearly feel that the Abbey Dean had the ability to destroy her. The Abbey Dean took out a scroll from his chest. Deep in the blue sky, a thunder sounded. The thunder came from the divine kingdom. I can't bear to write it. I will write the last one tomorrow. I love you all. Chapter 1153. I've decided to change the 7 tomes of the arcane to Kai Tian Zhongxiao. I like this name better today. It's cool, just like the book Jiangyi. On this day, please allow me to recommend Guanyu's new book, Dota 2, The King of Esports. The book is now on the Qidian with nearly 1 million words. It's totally ready to be read. Book number 314-9406. Then, I'd like to praise Elon's welfare and secrets photos for encouraging me at this beautiful moment. At the same time, I'd like to urge you to pay attention to my official account, Mounty1118. This is the best way to keep in touch with me. I'll inform you about the postscript and follow-up details in time. Thank you. I'll continue after dinner. There was always someone better. Beyond the blue sky was the Divine Kingdom. The thunder from the Divine Kingdom was magnificent, as if it was announcing something to the whole world. On the sea to the east of the Kingdom of Song, a storm that had never been seen in 1,000 years suddenly appeared. A violent rain fell on the Tile Mountain. In the sky of the divine halls of West Hill, faint traces of lightning flashed. Only Chang'an remained the same. Because the Abbey Dean was standing there. In his hand was a scroll of the arcane tome. The arcane tome. The thunder from the divine country continued and did not disperse for a long time, spreading endless divine might to the human world. The Abbey Dean did nothing. He just held the arcane tome and looked at the sky quietly. The thunder became lower and lower, as if the supreme existence was also afraid. The Abbey Dean was very calm. He took out the second scroll of the arcane tome. This scroll was a bit broken, with many pages missing. The arcane tome was the fall tome. At the edge of the world was a bottomless ocean, from the Black Sea on the snow-capped peak in the north, to the calm sea in the south, and to the storm sea. Suddenly, countless clouds fell from the sky and flowed to the sea like a waterfall. The clouds and mist connected with the sea and formed 4 endless cloud walls. The thunder from the Divine Kingdom became lower and lower, as if it was sad. The Abbey Dean took out the third scroll of the arcane tome. The arcane tome was no longer in the shape of a book. There were only some ashes left, which looked like black powder or gravel that had been baked by the sun for thousands of years. Yes, it was the Sha Han scroll. All the sand on the ground began to flow slowly. The desert in the middle of the wilderness, the dry land at the edge of the quagmire, all the sand turned into an abyss that swallowed everything. Even light seemed to be devoured. The Abbey Dean stood in the wind, his black hair dancing in the wind. He looked calm, like a deity. The sound of thunder in the Divine Kingdom was so low that it was almost inaudible. It finally showed its submission. Even the Abbey Dean was slightly absent-minded. Countless years ago, the prohibition set by the gambling addict was the greatest responsibility of Taoism to this world, but no one had ever tried it, and no one even dared to think about it. The Abbey Dean thought so and did so. Now it seemed that he had succeeded. He then took out the other 4 scrolls of heavenly tomes. When he took out the reverse hand scroll, the quiet lake in the Jishou Abbey in the depths of the West Hill Divine Palace suddenly rippled. The reflection of the 7 thatched cottages on the lake suddenly turned right. When he took out the open hand scroll, a crack suddenly appeared in the deepest part of the blue sky, in which a palace made of pure light could be vaguely seen. That was the Divine Kingdom. When he took out the sun hand scroll, the sun in the sky suddenly became extremely bright, and countless rays of light scattered around. At the same time, the perfect and solemn palaces in the Divine Kingdom became even brighter. When he took out the bright hand scroll, the whole world was filled with light. 7 scrolls of heavenly tomes, 7 words. Day. Fall. Sand. Bright. Heaven. Reverse. Open. Sunset and sand will reverse tomorrow. This was the reversal of heaven and earth, the reconstruction of light, and the opening of heaven. The 7 scrolls of heavenly tomes appeared in front of Chang'an city. The Divine Kingdom appeared in the sky. The cloud wall fell and surrounded the whole world. The world became brighter and brighter, and there was only light left. There was a horrible buzzing sound. Because the buzzing sound was made by the vibration of tens of thousands of hard bows. It represented the strong killing intent of tens of thousands of Tang soldiers, and it represented tens of thousands of sharp arrows piercing through the sky. Tens of thousands of arrows flew over the high city wall and shot toward the Abbey Dean like a storm. The Abbey Dean looked at the rain of arrows without any expression on his face. He raised his hand. There was another buzzing sound. But compared to the sound of the resonance of tens of thousands of strings, this sound was extremely soft, because it was the sound of the air being slightly vibrated and turned into a string. None of the arrows fell in front of him, not to mention touched his indigo robe. Tens of thousands of arrows suddenly stopped and floated in the space outside Chang'an. The scene looked extremely strange. A bird flew from the forest by the state highway outside the city. It was a little tired and was ready to take a rest. Then it saw many strange branches that it had never seen before, and it flew over there. It landed on an arrow, stretched out one of its wings, and was ready to comb the fine hair under its wings. Suddenly, it found that the foot under its claw was a little unstable, and it flew away with a soft chirp. The arrow that was stepped on by it fell slowly, dejected and powerless. The still scene came back to life. Tens of thousands of arrows fell like real rain. They scattered and spread a thin layer under the city wall of Chang'an. Tens of thousands of arrows could not touch the clothes. Tens of thousands of arrows were still in the wind. The laws of physics in this world seemed to have lost their effect at that moment. Although it was only for a moment, it was still extremely unimaginable. Who could master and use the laws so perfectly? Sang Sang could before. So could the current Abbey Dean. He held the iron chain between the human world and the divine kingdom in his hand. He represented Taoism and regained control of Haotian. He was about to merge with the laws and wills in the divine kingdom. The sky became brighter and brighter because of the blazing sun. The majestic divine kingdom was vaguely visible in the deep blue sky, as if it was burning together with the sun. An indescribable divine power fell from the sky and fell on the Abbey Dean. An indescribable beam of light fell from the sky and fell on the sky of Chang'an. Compared to the power of Haotian obtained from the Tianqi state, the divine power was like the sun to the firefly. The beam of light was the same when compared to the Haotian divine light produced by the Westhill divine skill. The Abbey Dean looked at Ning Ke and Sang Sang on the city wall quietly. His eyes became calmer and more emotionless. Ning Ke looked at him, and the array pestle in his hand was extremely hot. The streets and alleys of the entire Chang'an city had woken up. An incalculable amount of qi of heaven and earth flowed along the visible streets, eaves, mountains, towers, lakes, and temples, as well as the invisible ditches and hidden paths, forming a looming arch in a complex array formation that was beyond human comprehension. This was the God-stunning array. The beam of light that fell from the sky landed on top of the God-stunning array. Like flowing water, it flowed along the invisible arch and flowed towards the fields of Chang'an city. It was extremely beautiful, but also extremely soul-stirring. Everyone knew that if the beam of light broke through the God-stunning array, or even if only a few drops of liquid light seeped into it, the entire Chang'an city might be destroyed and turned into a sea of fire. The array pestle was getting hotter and hotter, which meant that more and more qi of heaven and earth had gathered in Chang'an city. Ning Ke's palms were steaming, which was the result of his sweat evaporating. The divine power from the sky was indeed horrifying. How long could the God-stunning array last? Ning Ke's face was a bit pale. Sang Sang's face was even paler than his, especially when she saw the divine kingdom deep in the blue sky, the burning sun and the beam of light falling from the sky. She was terrified. The sun was really burning, scattering infinite light like jade. The storm on the East Sea had already evaporated. The reeds on the great swamp tiredly lowered their heads. The walls of clouds around the world reflected the light back to the land. The light refracted and overlapped, making the entire human world too bright to look at directly. No one could look at the sun directly. The Abbey Dean floated up and came to a place as high as the city wall. He looked at her and said, "Come on." He was expressionless, and his voice was emotionless. But he seemed to feel pity. Song Song's body trembled slightly. Her old blue and white robe also began to tremble. Every time her body trembled, her face would turn paler, and some golden dust would come out from the surface of her indigo robe. The golden dust particles were vaguely the silhouette of a person. Where did the golden shadow come from? Or was it her soul? Sang Sang frowned in pain. The golden shadow slowly left her body and floated out of the city. The God-stunning array could temporarily resist the divine power from the sky, but it could not stop this scene. The direction where the golden shadow floated was the Abbey Dean. At this moment, the Abbey Dean had already opened the first volume of the arcane tome, the Tian hand scroll. Would the golden shadow that left Sang Sang eventually become a picture on the Tian hand scroll? With the 7 volumes of the arcane tome, the Abbey Dean broke through the blue sky and possessed the divine power formed by the objective rules and consciousness. If he wanted to become the new Haotian, he needed the divine power. What was the divine power? The divine power was not the core of power, but a basic property. In the simplest words, it was what made a god, and what made a god a god. In an inaccurate and vague way, it was the qualification. From another point of view, humans were humans because they had their personality. Gods were gods because they had the divine power. The divine power was the personality of a god, and it was an existence beyond the objective will. Of course, the transcendence here could also be a fall. Sang Sang had awakened subjective consciousness. She had the divine power of Haotian. What the Abbey Dean wanted to do now was to strip the divine power from her body. Who could stop him? It was almost noon, and the sun was even hotter. The beam of light from the sky pressed down the invisible protective circle that enveloped Chang, and even lower. The flowing light fell outside the city like a waterfall and ignited countless flames. Ning Ke held Sang Sang in his arms. As the golden shadow gradually came out of her body, Sang Sang became weaker and paler. Looking at the flowing light, he recalled the last game of chess that Sang Sang and Master Qishan played in the Lank Temple many years ago. In the world of the chessboard, Sang Sang was constantly chased by the rules. Now, the Abbey Dean represented the rules. The rules could not be changed, so he had absolute power. Even the God-stunning array could only struggle and could not make an effective counterattack. Because Chang was in this world. In this world, one had to obey the rules of the world. Unless one had the state of the headmaster and cultivated the real no rules. The no rules was not the limitless. The state of no rules might be the last step that human cultivation could reach. Only when one reached that step could there be no rules and ignore any rules. Ning Ke could not cultivate the no rules. After the headmaster, there might not be a second person who cultivated the no rules. Then, he could only try to break this world. Chapter 1154. Breaking the evil old world and building a beautiful new world sounded simple, but in fact, for the world itself, this was the biggest thing, and for people, the world was the biggest. Therefore, whether it was breaking the old world or building a new world, it became the biggest thing. The biggest thing was naturally the most difficult. Just like what the Abbey Dean was doing now had never been done before, what Ning Ke wanted to do had never been done before. Lian Xing only had a simple and bloody idea back then, but he had never put it into practice. Therefore, no matter how much preparation he had made, he did not know how to start. Yes, he had been preparing for several years. For a lifetime, several years was not a short time. But compared with the grand proposition of breaking the world, it was a little ridiculous. And he had never made up his mind. Because the deity that represented the old world was in his arms. The destruction of the old world would inevitably mean the death of Sang Sang. Many years ago, he and she had been discussing this problem, but they had never found a feasible third way. So they loved and killed each other until now. Should he let Sang Sang die to save the world? Ning Ke would not do that. If he were a moral maniac or a martyr, he would not have carried her on his back and fled all over the world. His hands were stained with the blood of the innocent. He remembered there was a famous poem in that world. Life is precious, but love is even more valuable. For freedom, both can be abandoned. If it was Jun Mo, he would definitely abandon his life for freedom. But Kuharan had already abandoned it. If it was Yi Hongyu, she would definitely abandon love for freedom. But Lotus had already abandoned it. Ning Ke did not want to abandon anything. He had always been greedy and shameless. To be more precise, he was very stingy. He had always been thinking about another famous poem in that world. How can the world be perfect? Don't let the Buddha down, don't let you down. Except for those truly merciful monks in the Lank temple, he and second brother did not have any good feelings for the Buddhism sect. The Buddha in this poem naturally had to be replaced with the word human. How could he not let the human world or Sang Sang down? Ning Ke did not know. Sang Sang leaned against his chest and suddenly stretched out her arms to hug him. She hugged him very tightly. The golden dust that seeped out from her body and the faintly discernible afterimage kept struggling between the two of them. It wanted to leave but couldn't for a moment. A warm power entered Ning Ke's body. His psyche power rose and spread to the human world through the array pestle in his hand. Let's try. Maybe we can succeed. Sang Sang leaned on his chest and said with her eyes closed. Just like countless times in Min Mountain, the city of Wei, Chang'an, and the West Hill, no matter whether she was a little handmaiden or Haotian, she was the one who ultimately decided everything. She had made up her mind. But today, Ning Ke was not as obedient as before. You will die. Sang Sang closed her eyes and said calmly, "You've lived with me for so many years. That's enough." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "Aren't you afraid?" Sang Sang said in a trembling voice, "I'm scared." Ning Ke smiled and said, "Then I will accompany you." Sang Sang opened her eyes and looked at him, wanting to say something. Ning Ke looked at her and said calmly, "In the Lank temple, I said that if you died, I really didn't want to live anymore. So let me die with you." Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, "Can we meet in the next life?" Ning Ke laughed and asked, "When was the first time we met?" Sang Sang was a little confused. "Wasn't it the day you picked me up?" "No, it was the day you were born," Ning Ke said. "That day in the woodshed of the official of council's mansion, I hid in the well after killing the steward and the young master. I didn't dare to get up for a long time. I was very hungry and looked everywhere for something to eat. Then I saw you." "I see." She looked a little confused. "In the Red Lotus Temple, I was about to be killed by Long Qing. I leaned against the side of the carriage and you were in the carriage. There was only half a step between us. I thought that in the next life, we would only be half a step apart. That way, it would be easier for me to find you. You see, I never doubted whether I could meet you in the next life." Ning Ke said, "Because we are destined to be together forever." Sang Sang said, "This is really the most cliché but also the most touching words of love." Ning Ke kissed her forehead and said, "Because you only need to be willing." Destiny meant that she was willing. "I do." Sang Sang said with a smile and her eyes were a little wet. She forgot how many times she wanted to cry since she came to the human world. But it seemed that it was related to this man every time. Ning Ke asked, "Are you still afraid?" Sang Sang said, "Still afraid, but I can be with you." She was very weak, but she was still Haotian. When she decided to do this, the whole human world felt her will. To be more precise, it was Ning Ke who told her will to the whole human world. They hugged each other tightly, just like that night many years ago. When they came back from the Kaiping market, Ning Ke read the first book about cultivation, the article on the response of the Tao. Then he fell into a deep sleep and held her tightly in his arms as usual. Then he had a dream. He dreamed of a sea. That was Ning Ke's first awareness. As long as Sang Sang was in his arms, he could feel the whole world. At the same time, the whole world could feel him. The cliff yard in front of the divine halls of West Hill was already a sea of blood. Xiong Chumo was dead. He Mingqi was dead. Those whom Ning Ke asked to die were all dead. The middle-aged priest stood in front of the stone house on the cliff yard, looking a little lonely. Yi Hongyu and Cheng Lixue stood in front of the divine halls of West Hill. Countless people were kneeling on the cliff yard. The war between the academy and Taoism had already ended, at least in the secular world. However, just a moment ago, there was a strange phenomenon that attracted everyone's attention. People saw the curtain of clouds falling from the East Sea, the blazing sun, the horrible light pillar above Chang'an City, and the light that flowed like a waterfall. Then there was light. The light was dazzling. Except for powerhouses like Yi Hongyu, no one could see anything in the human world. Even Yi Hongyu and the middle-aged priest squinted their eyes. Songsangs came to the field with the wind. The middle-aged priest knew that she was reborn and couldn't help but sigh. You've been guarding the human world for thousands of years. Yi Hongyu also understood. She frowned and said, "What a pair of idiots." Mo Shanshan stood beside her. Her face was pale, and she was silent. In that small town, the butcher put down his knife, but Jun Mo was still holding the iron sword. That was the biggest difference between the two. The butcher knew that the war had developed to the point that he couldn't intervene, so he let go. But Jun Mo thought that if the youngest brother and the girl died and the Abbey Dean couldn't be defeated, it would be his turn to fight. In the Tianqi mountains of the wilderness, Yu Lian's yellow dress was fluttering in the wind. She kept heading north and did not even look at Chang'an. No one could command the entire human world, not even the headmaster. He only represented the human world and fought against Haotian for thousands of years. What Ning Ke wanted to do was to sense and then try to lead the will of the entire human world. What kind of will was that? The sun was burning. The divine kingdom deep in the sky was getting clearer. The world was bright. It was a day that had never been seen before. Even the blue sky was turning pure white. The light made people blind. Few could still open their eyes. The light made people hot. The entire human world was enveloped in heat. The great swamp was steaming, the South Sea was surging, and the remaining snow was melting. Cicadas suddenly chirped in the wilted forest. The sea of snow in the cold region of the far north actually showed signs of thawing. It was too hot. It was too hot to sweat, too hot to breathe. Chang'an was constantly attacked by the light pillars from the divine kingdom. But with the protection of the God-stunning array, it was relatively better than the world outside the city. At least people could open their eyes. But it was still very hot. Li Yu and the young emperor of Tang were in the imperial study. Her dress was already wet with sweat and her breathing became heavy. She held her brother's hand, walked to the window and opened it. In the spring breeze pavilion, Old Master Chao and Shangguan Yangyu sat opposite each other. Both of them had taken off their shirts, revealing their skinny and ugly bodies. The heat was unbearable. "I can't stand it anymore." Old Master Chao stood up with the support of his walking stick and pushed open all the windows in the room. Looking at the waterfall of light in the sky, he cursed furiously, "F***ck your grandmother, are you trying to kill me with the heat?" The human world was experiencing the same cold and heat. No matter if one lived by the river or by the sea, no matter if there was wind or not, they could not escape the heat wave. The whole world became an iron house with firewood burning outside. It was extremely stuffy. The will was the thought and what one wanted to do. Now, everyone living in this world wanted a cool breeze, to open the window and to open the door. If the stuffy iron house had no doors or windows, then they could only break it. Ning Ke sensed the thoughts of billions of people and knew that it was the will of the human world. The psyche power of billions of people, no matter where they came from, rushed toward Chang'an and entered the God-stunning array. Ning Ke could not withstand such a large amount of psyche power. Sang Sang took the array pestle from his hand. The majestic psyche power from all over the human world entered her body through the array pestle. She was Ning Ke's natal item. If she had it, then Ning Ke had it. The academy in the south of Chang'an was also unbearably hot at this time. The scholar in front of the cliff cave was also soaked, but he did not feel it at all. He was still staring at the books on the table and thinking about what the Abbey Dean had said. A scholar is useless in the end. A useless scholar. The more the scholar thought about it, the angrier and more disappointed he became. He angrily stretched out his hands and pushed the books off the table. Those books left the table, but did not fall to the ground. Instead, they floated in the air. In the cliff cave, countless books also left the bookshelves and floated in the air. So, that's what happened. The scholar understood. An innocent smile appeared on his old face. He finally felt relieved. Go, let him know that words themselves have power. Countless books left the cliff cave of the academy and flew to the city wall of Chang'an like flocks of birds. The academy had a vast collection of books, including rare classics and common books such as the miscellaneous notes of the two capitals. It was hard to calculate the number of books. At this time, they actually surrounded Chang'an in the air. A useless scholar, is that what you said? Ning Ke looked at the Abbey Dean and said, then I will write a word for you. Before his voice died away, he raised his arm and grasped an invisible pen with his fingers. Where was the ink? How much ink did he need to write such a big word? Outside the city wall of Chang'an, countless books floating in the air suddenly merged together. Books, not paper. Books were writing paper. There were words in the books. Those words were written in ink. There were innumerable words in the countless books. Ning Ke wanted to use the ink left by countless predecessors. Chapter 1155. Why could human beings become the wisest of all creatures? No matter in the world Ning Ke came from or in this world, there were many explanations for this. Some people said that it was because they had learned how to use fire, while others said that it was because they had learned how to use tools. Humans were different from animals, and only those who valued righteousness. This was the opinion of youngest uncle and Jun Mo. However, there were even more people who believed that the most important difference was in the written language, because only written language could be passed down, the written language itself had power. This was the truth that scholars finally understood, and it was also what Ning Ke wanted to tell the Abbey Dean. Ning Ke held the non-existent pen and dipped it into the sea of books outside Chang'an. He held his wrist and elbow and casually wrote 2 strokes in the air, which seemed a little sloppy. The Abbey Dean was silent. He knew that the character Ning Ke was going to write must be a big talisman that had never appeared in human history. He had been mentally prepared, but he did not expect that Ning Ke would write it so casually and simply. Swish, swish. 1 stroke and 1 stroke. Was it still the same character? The Abbey Dean looked at the sky, which was no longer blue and was illuminated by the light, but found nothing there. The character Ning Ke wrote did not fall in the sky, but on the ground. What was the purpose of opening the sky? It was to open the earth. He wanted to open the earth. Outside the giant sinkhole in the western wilderness, millions of serfs were building a new home under the leadership of Tang. Although there was no perennial hot spring here, and the climate was much colder than at the bottom of the sinkhole, no one complained. Because they could see further away, they were no longer faced with the cold and steep cliff. They could go further, and they could see the sun as high as they were. Today's sun was a little strange. It was especially bright, and the light was very dazzling. However, the snow had melted much faster. Perhaps next year, the soil here would become fertile, and the harvest should be very good. However, they were used to growing barley, and they did not know if they could grow wheat well. This was what the people were thinking. But it was still a happy thing. The sun on the surface was indeed different from the underground. It was so close and so hot, so people sang and danced happily. 2,000 miles to the east, they arrived at the city of Wei in the northern border of the Tang Empire. The wilderness outside the city had been soaked in blood for a long time. The tower made of the golden tribe cavalrymen's heads had long been rotten. Today, it was illuminated by the light, but it was not purified. Instead, it gave off a pungent smell of blood and decay. And the talisman lines formed by the footprints on the bloody plain became clearer. There was a line between the giant pit and the city of Wei, which was the beginning of a stroke. The stroke continued to the southeast and reached the west hill. Chen Pipi looked at the city of Chang and shrouded in light and smiled. He took off the crown on his head and slowly sat down with the 13 disciples of the new stream and tens of thousands of followers at the foot of the mountain. They began to read the scriptures. It was the last volume of the scriptures of the new stream, written by Ning Quebec. The words were easy to understand, and the wishes and desires were so direct. People wanted to walk out of the dark valley and go to a wider world. The stroke finally fell on the Lank Temple. All the stones in the valley of Hua Mountain suddenly lit up. The stroke that crossed the east and the west of the continent was written by Ning Quebec. The other stroke followed the Min Mountain where Ning Ke and Sang Sang lived for many years, passed through the broken Helan city, and reached the distant cold region of the far north, and ended in a snow-capped peak. On the cliff, Yu Lian held Li Man Man and glanced at Chang'an. The stroke that crossed the north and the south of the continent was written by Ning Quebec. The two strokes met in Chang'an. People in Chang'an were already walking on the streets. Just like that year, they held kitchen knives, wooden sticks, inkstones, and paperweights, and silently looked at the dazzling sky. Except for the distant west wilderness and Chang'an, which was protected by the God-stunning array, people in other places could not open their eyes. In a village in the south, Yang Erxi closed his eyes and shot arrows at the sky, cursing the damn heaven. In the old place of the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom, a young disciple of the Sword Garret in mourning clothes stabbed at the sky with his eyes closed. The new stream had already prevailed in the human world. As Chen Pipi's voice spread from the top of the Peach Mountain to the bottom, it quickly spread to the whole world. Countless people quietly chanted and prayed. Outside Chang'an, the Abbey Dean was silent. He once told Ning Ke that he deeply loved this world, and he was willing to be the enemy of the whole world. However, when he found that he really stood on the opposite side of the whole world, it was not a good feeling. Suddenly, a horrible sound came from the depths of the west wilderness. The serf stared at the bottomless abyss at the bottom of the giant sinkhole and did not know what had happened. The abyss quickly spread to the southeast. The abyss was a crack in the earth. The ground was cracking. The crack came to the city of Wei in an instant and swallowed the wilderness full of sin and blood. The crack went straight to the Lank Temple and finally into the sea. The same crack appeared in the Min Mountain and went straight to the Snow Sea. It was like someone holding a branch and writing on the sand. It was Ning Ke writing. He was writing a talisman. It was a big talisman that had never been written before. The big talisman only had 2 simple strokes. This was the simplest word, but it was also the most complicated one. Human. The Abbey Dean looked at the distant west wilderness and the distant north region. He watched Ning Ke cut 2 cracks in the whole world with 2 simple strokes. He was silent for a long time. Then he looked at Ning Ke and said, "When you wrote this word in Changpan, I told you that your strokes were wrong. Today you are even more wrong. You didn't even put it in the right position." Many years ago, Master Yen Sei and Wei Guangming died together on the nameless mountain in the north of Changpan. At the last moment of his life, he saw a faraway picture. It was the big talisman that Ning Ke wrote today. He saw that the big talisman only had 2 simple strokes. It started in the north of the wilderness, one fell in the west, and the other fell in the east. They met in Changpan. It was the right word, human. The word Ning Ke wrote today started in the west of the wilderness, one fell in the southeast, and the other fell in the north. They still met in Changpan. But the word human was crooked. If you want to fight me with the power of the human world, you should first understand the meaning of the word human. If Jun Mo wrote it, he would definitely write it very correctly. How can a man stand in the world if he is not correct? The Abbey Dean looked at Ning Ke and said calmly. Ning Ke shook his head and said, "You are wrong." The Abbey Dean frowned slightly and said, "What am I wrong? No one in the world is qualified to teach me how to write." Ning Ke looked at him and said calmly, "What my master Yen Sei wanted to see is not necessarily correct. Even if second brother could write it, it is not the true meaning of a man." Why? How can a man stand in the world if he is not correct? You are wrong. If there is a rainstorm, people hide in the cliff caves. If there is thunder and fire, people hide in the reeds. Why do people have to stand in the world? No, the word human is written and written. No matter how it is written or placed, it is human. It cannot fall. That is human. Ning Ke looked at him and said, "You don't even understand human. How can you win?" On the other side of the mountain and the other side of the sea, there was such a group of people. When they saw the mountain, they wanted to know what was on the other side of the mountain. When they saw the sea, they wanted to know what was on the other side of the sea. When they saw the sky, they wanted to know what was in the sky. These were all what they wanted. The wishes of these people gathered in Changpan and helped Ning Ke write the human talisman. They told the sky and the earth that they not only wanted to live, but also wanted to get more. Humans could be despicable, shameless, cruel, bloody, or even more despicable than animals. But humans could also be beautiful and noble, no. Even if there was no reason or virtue, as long as they were humans and they stood at the top of the world, they were qualified to eat meat. To go further. To experience more things. To understand more truth, to experience more, and then to move forward. Because they were humans. So they were humans. That was why human was the noblest word in the world. It was also the most powerful word. The Academy always said, because, and this was the biggest, because. What you said makes sense. The Abbey Dean looked at Ning Ke and said calmly, but it is still not enough. The 2 cracks on the ground were getting deeper and deeper. Countless rocks fell into the abyss. The 3 ends of the cracks went further, as if they were going to cut the whole world. What was even more miraculous was that the formless and terrifying power in the crack kept moving deeper, like a thread tightly binding a scroll, causing the ground to bend. The Taoist talisman was splitting the world. But the Abbey Dean said it was still not enough. Rules and the world are 2 sides of the same coin. If you want to break the rules, you have to break the world. And you are indeed breaking the world. The problem is, will I give you time? In the light, the Abbey Dean looked extremely solemn. The whole world was bathed in the light. The sun was burning. The divine kingdom was being concretized. Countless rays of light fell from the sky. The cicadas stopped chirping, and the hot fog above the great swamp increased. Some people were blinded, and some people were unconscious. The two cracks on the ground were illuminated by the light. Green smoke came out from the abyss. This was the world of light. There was only light. Every ray of light had its own power. Countless rays of light had its own power. A terrifying divine might fell from the sky. Ning Ke wrote this unprecedented talisman. The human world was changing the human world. The sky would not let the human world change. The two most extreme powers met each other. The whole world started to tremble. The invisible light shield of Chang'an was on the verge of collapse. Do you want to destroy the world? Ning Ke asked. The Abbey Dean said calmly, you can stop. Ning Ke thought for a while and said, no, I will not be threatened. The Abbey Dean said after a moment of silence, you will. Ning Ke said, the headmaster once told me that I only love one person, not the world. The Abbey Dean said calmly, no, that was in the past. If you don't love, how could you write that character? Ning Ke was silent. Sang Sang became weaker and weaker. She could barely hold the array pestle in her hand. The golden shadow was about to leave her body, leaving only a trace of attachment. The sky hand scroll in the Abbey Dean's hand was waiting for her return. He looked at the flowing light in the sky and felt the horror. The sun became more and more dazzling. Even he could not look at it directly. Who could change all this? Who could make the whole world disappear in an instant? He thought of the game of chess in the Lank Temple. The rules in the chessboard turned into countless holy light spots and chased Sang Sang all over the world. How similar was it to the scene now? At that time, he opened the big black umbrella and helped him and Sang Sang escape the disaster. The big black umbrella was a piece of darkness. Now there was only the bright day left in the world. Who could block the light? It was stuffy in Lincoln. People were crying in the shabby alleys and old streets. A pretty girl wiped the sweat from her forehead. She felt the coming of death. She took out a piece of paper from the drawer and read the words on it. She gradually calmed down. Her name was Huanzi. She was one of the female students that Yi Su had accepted here. She was a follower of the Protestant Church. After Yi Su's death, she returned to Lincoln and preached secretly. At the same time, she missed her teacher. She began to read the words on the paper. They were the words said by Yi Su before he died. When the everlasting night comes, the light of the sun will be completely blocked. The sky and the earth will fall into darkness. People will rejoice because that is the real life. Ning Ke took out something and put it on. It was a pair of glasses. The lens was made of black water mirror. He looked at the bright sun in the sky. With the sunglasses, he could finally see it clearly. He wanted to see if the prophecy written by Buddha on the Ming hand scroll would come true. Would Yi Su's prophecy come true? The light that filled the world suddenly seemed to be less. Then, it became less. The infinite light was gone. Countless people looked up at the gradually darkening sky. Human beings were afraid of the night. But when there was only light, they looked forward to the coming of the night. So the night came. All of a sudden, the sky turned dark. The night came to the human world. The world was quiet. Sang Sang turned around in his arms and looked at the night sky. She was a little confused. Even she couldn't imagine such a change. Is this, the everlasting night? No. Ning Ke put the sunglasses on her nose and said with a smile, it's the solar eclipse. You see, the moon is blocking the sun. That year on the ship, I told my teacher. That's what the solar eclipse is all about. My teacher finally figured out what to do. He should have figured it out long ago and appeared long ago. But, it's still very cool. And the last chapter. My writing is really cool. But the next chapter will be later. I'm really tired and hungry. I need to get something to eat and take a bath to calm down. Chapter 1156. When the everlasting night comes, the light of the sun will be completely covered, and the sky and the earth will fall into darkness. People will rejoice because that is the real life. Before Yi Su became a sage, he said something similar to a prophecy. And countless years ago, Buddha read the 7 tomes of Arcane and wrote a comment on the Ming hand scroll. There was a similar record in his notes, which said, "In the everlasting night, the moon will appear, and the world will naturally come back to life. In this way, the world will not die, and there will be another way. In this case, it is better to wait for the arrival of the long night. Why do things against the will of heaven? Is heaven also waiting for the arrival of the night? Or is it afraid of the arrival of the night? Is it afraid of the night itself, or the moon that comes with the night?" What was happening proved Yi Su's prophecy, and gave the perfect answer to the questions left by Buddha. There was a heaven waiting for the arrival of the night, and there was a heaven afraid of the arrival of the night. It was afraid of the night itself, and also the moon that comes with the night, because the night comes with the moon. The world was dark, and the sun was covered. The divine kingdom was hidden in the thick ink, and it was hard to see. The Abbey Dean, who was floating in front of Chang'an, had a very complicated expression. There were rules, but they had lost the source of power. How could they fight? The beam of light from the divine kingdom had long disappeared, and the heat of the human world had long been replaced by coolness. There was no power that could stop the talisman written by Ning Quebec. 2 abysses spread quickly on the surface of the earth, and the word human became bigger and bigger. The earth was really like a piece of paper that was tied up, and then it slowly rose, with a thunderous sound. The process was slow, but unstoppable. After a long time, the horizon appeared in the sky. Only the tip of the sail could be seen on the sailboat on the other side of the sea. If one stood high enough, he could even see the slightly curved arc in the distance. "Is this the new world?" Sang Sang asked. Ning Ke answered, "Maybe." The perfect bubble appeared in front of her again, and the 2 tiny cracks on it had become very deep. The bubble could burst at any time, which meant that her world was about to be destroyed. Sang Sang looked at the world calmly, waiting for her own death. Ning Ke held her gently and waited with her. Countless wills full of desire, or in other words, power, surged from all directions of the human world along the 2 cracks on the ground that were getting deeper and deeper. They entered the streets of Chang'an and entered Song Song's body through the God-stunning array. She had listened to the prayers of the believers in the divine kingdom for tens of thousands of years, but it was the first time she had encountered such a genuine desire, a desire that moved her. In an instant, she understood the academy and the new stream founded by Yi Su. It didn't matter whether the world loved her or not. It didn't matter whether she loved the world. She and humanity were one. She wasn't the cold, objective rule of this world, but the rule of the world that humanity knew. There was a flash of light. If the rules were a product of human understanding of the world, then they could naturally be changed. They could naturally grow along with human understanding. Sang Sang looked at Ning Ke quietly and said, "I seem to be able to live." Ning Ke's arms trembled slightly. He looked into her eyes and said, "Then live forever." Sang Sang said, "But I don't want to serve you anymore." Ning Ke said, "I will serve you." Countless desires and wills came from all over the human world and were turned into power by the God-stunning array. Countless cracks appeared on the city wall of Chang'an. Sang Sang looked up at the dark night sky and the looming divine kingdom. She gently waved her hand. Silently, a colorless beam of light shot out from Chang'an to the night sky. The beam of light came from the God-stunning array, but it passed through her hand. Therefore, it was a transparent light. She knew best how to break out of her own world. The transparent beam of light passed through the Abbey Dean's body and fell into the night sky. Sang Sang took off her sunglasses and carefully helped Ning Ke put them on. The moon was still in the night sky. But the sun seemed to be closer to the ground and showed its bright edge. The light came to the human world again, but it was not as fierce and horrible as before. The pale sky became blue again, just like the expensive washed porcelain she secretly hid in her house by the Yanming Lake. 3 cracks appeared in the blue sky. They were opposite to the 3 cracks on the ground. They were all people. The transparent beam of light contained unimaginable power and was about to tear the sky apart. The beam of light was transparent, but the aura inside was not pure. It was extremely messy. Billions of people had billions of wills. How could they be completely consistent? But it was extremely lively. Ning Ke thought of the steam from the steamed bun shop by the street and the footprints on the bluestone. Sang Sang thought of the night by the snow sea and the hot spring. Maybe the Abbey Dean thought of something. He looked at the transparent beam of light and felt its grandeur and imperceptibility. He was moved by its beauty. He frowned and asked, "What power is this? What aura is this?" "This is the power of the human world," Ning Ke said. The Abbey Dean was silent for a moment and said, "I see." Deep in the blue sky, the looming divine kingdom was eroded at an unimaginable speed under the power of the human world. Then it collapsed into the tiniest dust. Then it was the blue sky itself that collapsed. The sky turned into countless thin jade pieces that were as light as goose feathers and fell on the human world. They could no longer block people's eyes from the outside world. What was above the sky? It used to be the divine kingdom. Now it was destroyed. What was there? It was a dark universe. It looked extremely cold and desolate. There was no sign of human habitation. It gave people an extremely uneasy feeling, as if it was the real netherworld. The whole world was quiet again. No one spoke. Was it the netherworld? People were thinking. Ning Ke and Sang Sang knew what they would see. They were not surprised. But it did not mean that others were not surprised. In a mountain village in the Great River Kingdom, a child picked up the half-cooked egg and looked at the dark sky in a daze. He wondered why the sun suddenly became so far away. Why did the stars become so far away? The child was very scared. He was about to cry. The egg in his hand fell to the ground and broke. The wind blew the eggshell, the egg white, and the yolk. The bubble in front of Sang Sang also broke. In the vast and boundless universe, there was a burning ball of fire. It was a star. Judging from the color of the star, it was still young. There were 7 planets revolving around the star. There was nothing in the orbit about 150 million kilometers away from the star. It was blank. It could be blank because the system was stable. But for some reason, there was a feeling that something was missing. At some point, the space there suddenly twisted slightly. After a long time, 2 clear cracks appeared on the surface of the twisted space. After another long time, the cracks curled up and disappeared. A blue planet appeared there. The process was hard to describe. It seemed that it took a long time for the planet to appear. It came out of the crack in the space, but it also seemed to appear on the orbit in an instant. The reason why the planet was blue was that the ocean covered most of its surface. With the sudden appearance of the blue planet, an invisible gravitational wave spread around. The galaxy around the star showed signs of instability. Fortunately, the few massive planets in the galaxy were far enough away from the blue planet. But its appearance had an impact. The orbits of several planets suddenly changed, and it would take a long time for them to stabilize again. What was more unfortunate was that the space about 300 million kilometers away from the star was densely covered with countless asteroids. The sudden appearance of the blue planet was like a delicious cake, attracting them. Countless asteroids and even small meteorites left their original space and flew quietly toward the blue planet. Of course, they couldn't go in a straight line, but they would eventually meet. The universe was dead silent. Those asteroids and meteorites left faint trails, like the traces of the god of death. The sky was full of meteorites, falling to the ground in the dark night. In a moment, the world would be destroyed. Above the sky, it was indeed the underworld. You are the son of Yama. The Abbey Dean looked at Ninkei and said. The underworld was a legend, a lie of Haotian, which was now accepted. But was it true? Many years ago, Wei Guangming saw Ninkei in Chang'an and thought he was the son of Yama. Later, Sangsang was thought to be the daughter of Yama. Long Qing thought he was the son of Yama. After so many twists and turns, it finally fell on Ning Quebec. He destroyed the world of Haotian and ushered in a new world. However, the new world didn't exist for long before it was destroyed. The real universe was so desolate, dangerous, and cold. What was the difference between it and the underworld? He didn't lead the underworld to the human world, but brought the human world into the underworld. Of course, he was the son of Yama. It shouldn't be like this. Ning Kei's voice was a bit cold. In the small town. Jun Mo waved his hand to break the array. He looked at the death messengers who were about to come to the human world and said, "Pick up your knife." The butcher picked up the heavy knife and walked to him. They looked up together. Jun Mo raised the iron sword and said, "Do you want to fight?" The butcher said, "Very well." The divine halls of West Hill. The battle had long ended. The followers of the new stream were sitting on the cliff platform and the mountain road, watching the scene that was far beyond their imagination. They were shocked, speechless. Chen Pipi stood up and frowned slightly, saying, "It shouldn't be like this." Tang Xiaotang held the iron rod and didn't say anything. Yi Hongyu stood on the edge of the cliff. Her blood-colored gown of judgment was fluttering in the night wind. She looked at the night sky and said expressionlessly, "The extraterrestrial demon. I'll kill you." People in this world didn't know what those meteorites with the aura of death were. But the cultivators could sense another clear reality. The sky was gone. Their bodies became much lighter. As light as feathers. They seemed to be able to leave the ground with just a thought. The rules that had suppressed cultivators for countless years in the world of Haotian no longer existed. The cultivators had gained true freedom. Cultivators in the no-doubt state suddenly entered the see-through state. Cultivators in the see-through state looked at the real stars in the sky and knew their destiny. The grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state easily crossed the threshold. The human world was unprecedentedly powerful. They didn't expect that they would face a life-and-death battle as soon as they gained freedom. But no one was afraid. Because this feeling was really good and worth fighting for. And they had the confidence to defeat all foreign enemies. Countless cultivators were ready to fight. But they didn't have a chance to attack. Even Jun Mo's iron sword didn't have a chance to attack. The ocean faced the stars, and the land faced the depths of the universe. Where cultivators were, they could see the sky full of stars and the moon showing its true appearance. With the eyesight of cultivators, they could naturally see clearly that it was a ball made of rocks. Its surface was extremely smooth, reflecting the light behind the earth. It was extremely perfect. Or it should not be called the moon, but the moon. That bright moon blocked all the meteorites. The loud rumbling sound couldn't reach the ground, but people on the ground felt it. Such a dense impact, such a terrible power. Even grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state or beyond the 5 states would have a hard time surviving. That bright moon took all the attacks for human beings. Could it withstand it? No one knew how long it had been. The horrible impact sound finally stopped. The moon was no longer perfect. There were craters formed by the impact everywhere, and magma was spewing everywhere, forming high and low places. Some places were bright, and some places were dark. Such a moon didn't look good, and even a little ugly. But it was still perfect in people's eyes. He had silently guarded the human world for 1,000 years. From now on, he would probably do it for tens of millions of years. The night ended, and the morning came. The sun rose slowly from the east. The sky reappeared. It was still blue, but more indescribable than before. Yes, the sky was wider, and there was endless space behind it. This feeling is indeed not bad. The Abbey Dean looked at Ning Ke and asked, but people are no longer the people they used to be. Is the human world still the human world we care about? The human world is the place where people live, isn't it? Ning Ke said, the drunkard thinks that cultivators, especially those who have reached a certain level, are no longer human. But I don't think so. I think cultivators are supermen. The Abbey Dean asked, Supermen? Ning Ke said, yes. Just like the world needs to change, human beings need to evolve eventually. I don't think it's a bad thing. I believe the apes thought so too. As soon as he finished speaking, a straight white line appeared in the sky. He saw clearly that there was a cultivator at the front of the white line. The cultivator wore a blue robe, which was sometimes dyed red by the sunlight. The Abbey Dean said thoughtfully, that is a rogue cultivator from the kingdom of Liang. His state is terrible. Ning Ke looked at the white line flying out of the atmosphere and into outer space. He laughed. Then, thousands of thin white lines rose from the ground and flew out of the atmosphere. There was a cultivator at the front of each white line. It was a spectacular scene. Human beings had started their new journey. Interesting. The Abbey Dean said calmly. Then he turned into countless light spots and disappeared in the first morning breeze of the new world. Ning Ke knew that he was already dead when the transparent light beam pierced through his body. The voice that talked to him earlier was the remnant consciousness that he forcibly left in this world with an extremely high state. It was because he was worried and wanted to see if the new world could survive in the underworld and if the human race could survive. In the end, he thought it was possible, so he died. The Abbey Dean had a surname but no name. He was called Chen Mao. The Mao in Chen Mao was the Mao in Mao, the Mao in Mao, and the Mao that could be seen everywhere in the human world. He represented a part of human beings. Ning Ke looked at the moon in the corner of the sky, which was about to be covered by the morning light. The headmaster represented another part of human beings. By the cliff of Peach Mountain, Chen Pipi bowed to the ground calmly. Tang Xiaotang also bowed to the ground. There was no everlasting night. The human world was getting colder and colder. It was the invasion of the coldness from outside the world. It seemed that the world could not be lonely forever, no matter whether there was the headmaster or the academy. As the sun shone down, the snow on the snow-capped peak gradually melted into trickles, and then converged into a stream that flowed south. Perhaps it would flood the wilderness, but it would also bring water needed for irrigation. Yu Lian sat on the cliff for many days, holding eldest brother. After many days, eldest brother's injury was healed. She put him down. Eldest brother became an ordinary person. It would take many years for him to return to the state he used to be. Perhaps, there would never be such a day. The old yellow ox left the West Hill and dragged the carriage to wait under the cliff. Eldest brother got on the ox cart and opened the last pot of wine left by his teacher. He drank it carefully and then sighed with satisfaction. He was so satisfied that he couldn't be any more satisfied. He even wanted to change his name to Li Man Man. See you again, younger sister. He looked at Yu Lian and said gently. Yu Lian lifted the curtain and sat on the cart. Eldest brother's expression changed slightly. He pointed at a white line in the sky and said, "Don't you want to go out and have a look?" A white line would appear in the human world at any time, which meant that a cultivator had left the human world. Cultivation was not a gift from Haotian to human beings. It was the will of human beings. Cultivators wanted to know more and experience more. Yu Lian, a grand cultivator, was not an exception. She would not be afraid of the seemingly dangerous world beyond the sky. Yu Lian said impatiently, there is no cover on the river. One can jump into the water to commit suicide at any time. Now there is no cover on the sky either. One can fly out if one wants to. What's the hurry? Eldest brother thought for a while and said, it makes sense. Yu Lian asked, where are you going? Eldest brother said, I want to walk around the new world and see if I can go back to where I started. Teacher and youngest brother both said so. But someone has to walk around to prove it. Yu Lian said, that will take a long time. Eldest brother said, the yellow ox is old now. It's inevitable that it will be slower. The ox turned around and glanced at the two. It didn't want to pay any attention to them. Yu Lian said, very good. Eldest brother asked, what's good about it? Yu Lian did not answer. It would take a long time. Very good. The ox cart creaked westward. One day, it passed by a place called Hanggu. The ox cart was stopped by a Taoist elder. The Taoist elder knelt in front of the carriage and wept bitterly. He begged Mr. First to leave some dharma for Taoism after the death of the Abbey Dean, the chaos in the West Hill Divine Palace, and the books in the cliff cave of the Academy were destroyed. Chen Pipi and Yi Hongyu could not teach him the dharma he sought. He could only beg Mr. First. Eldest brother was silent for a while and prepared to write a book. Yu Lian asked, how many volumes are you going to write? Eldest brother said seriously, there are 3,000 Taoism, and 3,000 volumes are appropriate. Yu Lian said, how long will it take? A few days ago, I heard that peony fish appeared in the mud pond. If we don't go, it will be eaten by the old black donkey. Just leave it to me. She was the grandmaster of the devil's doctrine and the enemy of Taoism. She had read many Taoist classics in the 23 years she studied in the academy. Eldest brother knew her talent and did not object. I'll talk and you write, Yu Lian said. The Taoist elder did not dare to object. He quickly picked up the brush and listened carefully. Tao can be told, but it is not the Tao, after a while. That's it. That's it. It's only 5,000 words. Is it not enough? It's so mysterious. Mr. Third, it's too mysterious. I'm so stupid that I can't understand it. Read it slowly if you don't understand. The ox cart continued westward. Hearing that there was peony fish ahead, the yellow ox finally cheered up. Eldest brother looked at Yu Lian with a smile and said nothing. Yu Lian looked calm. Eldest senior brother laughed. So did Yu Lian. Actually, there's something I don't understand, eldest brother said. Yu Lian was expressionless, but she was a little uneasy. Eldest brother was confused and asked, why does youngest brother always want me to find a person called on man to be his last disciple? And he said he could learn limitless. Yu Lian was a little annoyed and decided that she would not do anything when cutting the peony fish. There were two people in the world who were the best at cutting peony fish, eldest brother and Sang Sang. The headmaster of the academy did not count. And the key was the dipping sauce. Therefore, Gaga was very dissatisfied. While chewing the sashimi like it was firewood, it squinted its eyes and looked at Big Black, who was fighting with the female horse. It thought that when Old Yellow came later, it would put the blame on Big Black and say that all the peony fishes in the pond were eaten by it. There was not much difference between the new world and the old world. Those who liked to eat peony fish still liked to eat it, and those who liked to go on estrus still went on estrus. Fifth brother and eighth brother were still used to playing chess in the back of the mountain. Shiman and Beigong still liked to play zither and flute by the mirror lake because they felt that no one in the world was qualified to listen to their temperament. Wang Qi went to the Yueluan kingdom and it was said that he met the flower addict. As for what happened, no one knew. Chen Pipi and Tang Xiaotang stayed in the West Hill Divine Palace. Jun Emo and seventh sister went to a faraway place. His legend was still spreading in the increasingly fertile wilderness. No one knew where his iron sword was talking about him. The academy was still the academy, and Chang'an was still Chang'an. The House of Red Sleeves was now managed by Xiao Chao. The Tang Emperor officially ascended the throne. Li Yu lived in the Qin Palace and rarely saw people. Shangguan Yangyu was the ugliest prime minister in history. Xing Jing and his wife drank that cup of tea and naturally lived to 100 years. The bell of Wanyan Tower Temple was still so distant. The laughter in the Spring Breeze Pavilion never stopped. Old Master Chao had adopted Zhang San and Li Si as his sons. The famous 3 sticks of old and young in Chang'an had officially become a family. The brothers in the gang sat in the side hall and listened to the opera. The women were eating melon seeds in the flower hall. Chao Xiaoshu looked at the night sky in the garden silently. In these 2 months, more than 10 cultivators had left. It was said that there was a special saying, ascension. Chao Xiaoshu thought that it would be difficult for him to see the scenery of the other side in his life. Yes, there was a moon in this world now, according to the moon's waxing and waning. On the street outside the Chao mansion, a horse carriage was slowly moving towards Lin 47th Street. It was not easy for Pippi to refine a heavenly power pill. Why did you secretly throw it into his teacup? Don't you worry that he will pour the tea in the cup. He may pour the tea poured by others. But as his sister-in-law, why wouldn't he drink the tea you poured for him? How many people in this world are qualified to have Haotian pour tea for them? Although that guy likes to pretend to be cool, don't forget his famous words, if heaven allows me, I can live. Do you hear me? I'm being polite to you. It makes sense. But why do you want me to pour tea for him today? Because I owe him that bowl of noodles with fried eggs. It makes sense. When have I ever been unreasonable as a man? You're not second brother. Hey, can you not mention that cold-blooded and heartless man with one arm? The conversation in the carriage continued until they stopped in front of the old brush pen shop. Ning Ke and Sang Sang got out of the carriage. Sang Sang was as plump as before. She was holding an indigo dog in her arms. Standing in front of the old brush pen shop, Sang Sang looked at the night sky and asked softly, "Is this the world you came from?" Ning Ke said, "It should be." Sang Sang looked at him and asked, "Why are you so sure?" Ning Ke pointed at the bright moon in the night sky and said, "Because there is a moon." This sentence was actually very unreasonable. But weren't the disciples of the academy like this? Sang Sang asked, "The chi of heaven and earth in this world is escaping and dispersing to the outside world. One day it will disappear completely. Have you ever thought about what to do when that day comes?" Ning Ke said, "I think at that time, people might have already left here." Sang Sang was silent for a moment and said, "Are you willing to? This is our home." Ning Ke held her in his arms and looked at the night sky and said, "The journey of mankind should be the sea of stars. But, so many people have lived here. Don't you think it's a pity that there are no traces left? Wind and rain will blow away the wind and rain. No matter how strong a building is, even if it's carved on a stone, it will be weathered by time. But I think there will always be some spiritual things left." Ning Ke said, "Maybe after countless years, a new civilization will appear here. In that civilization, the headmaster, the abbey dean and eldest brother will all become legends or even myths." Sang Sang asked seriously, "What will be left behind?" Ning Ke smiled and said, "For example, what Confucius said." Pushing open the door of the old brush pen shop, there was a customer inside. The woman was wearing a blood-red robe of judgment. Who else could it be but Yi Hongyu? Yi Hongyu said to Sang Sang directly, "I have something to say to him. Don't be jealous." Sang Sang said, "I only eat dumplings with soy sauce." Yi Hongyu said expressionlessly, "I heard that you gave the owner of the hot and sour noodle slice soup shop a gold brick." Sang Sang walked to the backyard with the indigo dog in her arms. Is this the woman you want to marry even if the whole world is destroyed? Yi Hongyu looked at Ning Ke and said mockingly, you throw a pair of children into the Grand Secretary's mansion and walk around with an indigo dog every day. Did the headmaster know about such a noble lady? Ning Ke spread his hands helplessly because there was no way to explain it. Yi Hongyu said, let's get down to business. I'm leaving. Ning Ke was silent. Although he knew that this was inevitable, he still felt a little complicated. Yi Hongyu took out a letter from her arms and handed it to him. She said, I'm leaving with her. This is a letter from her to you. The her here was naturally Mo Shanshan. Ning Ke took the letter and glanced at the backyard. Then, he stuffed it into his sleeve. You are so useless. Yi Hongyu said mockingly. Ning Ke was furious and said, if you do this again, I'll fall out with you. Yi Hongyu reached out and grabbed his face. She said, let me help you. Ning Ke used the natural stream magical finger and was about to poke her chest. Yi Hongyu suddenly went forward and hugged him. His hand fell on her chest. Her lips fell on his. Very soft, very bouncy, very wet. He wanted to kiss her again. When Ning Ke was thinking about this, Yi Hongyu had already returned to her original position. She looked at him and said expressionlessly, this is for Shanshan. Ning Ke looked at her lips and sneered, unless she kissed you first. Yi Hongyu was slightly angry and said, it's a gift, don't you understand? Ning Ke suddenly fell silent and said, take care. Yi Hongyu also fell silent. After a long time, she said, there is a saying in the cultivation world. The joys and sorrows of two worlds cannot be interlinked. If they can meet, they will be saints. Ning Ke, you are a saint. Ning Ke looked at her quietly and said, you are a saintess. Yi Hongyu smiled and said, you are still as shameless as before. Ning Ke bowed to thank her. You said that the universe is very big and it is difficult to meet. Yi Hongyu said, but I hope that we can meet again in another world. Ning Ke said, when the child is older and the matter between the eldest and the third brother is settled, we will come. Yi Hongyu sighed and said, you two don't know how to take care of children. Why use this as an excuse? Ning Ke was very ashamed and said, kiss Shanshan for me, or I will kiss you again. Those who should not have left had left, but those who should have stayed. Ning Ke sat by the bed and looked at the thick stack of letters in the box. He was thinking silently. Sang Sang looked at him and said indifferently, who is the one who should not have left? Who is the one who should have left? Me. Ning Ke then realized that she knew what he was thinking. He suddenly felt that this kind of life was really meaningless. It was mainly because there was no privacy and it was too easy to misunderstand. As expected. Do you think I don't know what you were thinking about when you looked at the girl on the stage at the Chow Mansion today? TSK, that waist is thin, tender, soft. If you like it, you can touch it. Now Xiao Chao is in charge of the House of Red Sleeves. Mistress Jian's ban is no longer effective. If you like it, you can touch it as you like. I will let Xiao Chao pick the reddest one for you. Sang Sang hugged the green-skinned dog and kept talking. Enough. Ning Ke slammed the table and stood up, I only silently praised the waist. How did I offend you? Song Song's eyes were slightly wet and she said, you think my waist is too thick. Ning Ke was very depressed and did not know how to explain. He made up his mind and simply threw caution to the wind. He said loudly, what does this have to do with your waist? I just think that you don't want to cook now. Don't want to wipe the table. Don't want to pour water for my feet. Don't want to save money. Spend money every day. Walk around with a dog every day. Put on an indifferent expression at every turn. You have to understand that you are my wife now. It's not Great Master Hao Tian. Sang Sang cried and said, Ning Ke, you lied. Ning Ke was a little flustered and said, how did I lie? She said sadly, that day, I said that I would never serve you again. You said that you would serve me in the future. Yes, this was the first sentence that she thought of when the old world and the new world met at the top of the city wall of Chang'an. It must have been very important to her. What was amazing was that from that day onwards, Sang Sang really forgot about all the household chores. Ning Ke secretly observed for a long time and found that it was actually true. She was not lying to him. Sang Sang became a lady who would walk around with a dog in her arms. That was why he did not know how to explain to Yi Hongyu previously. He sighed and said, you have to learn to do something, right? Sang Sang did not hear anything and said sadly, you just think that my waist is too thick. Ning Ke was silent for a long time and said in a low voice. Well, I admit that it is a little. You have given birth to this child for such a long time. I thought you would lose weight, but, Sang Sang turned and walked out of the old brush pen shop. Ning Ke stood up nervously and asked, where are you going? Sang Sang did not turn her head and said, I am going to the scholar's mansion. Ning Ke was furious. He picked up the clothes pole in the courtyard and was about to revolt. If you dare to run away from home again, I will beat you to death. Sang Sang did not pay attention to him and walked out directly. After a moment, there was the sound of the front door closing. Ning Ke was stunned and very worried. He hurried to change his clothes and was ready to stop her. However, because he was too nervous, he could not put on his shoes for a long time. When he put on his shoes and looked up, he saw Sang Sang by the door. She wiped her tears and said, Ning Ke, are you hungry? I will cook some noodles for you. She did not leave at all. She had never left. Ning Ke stepped forward and held her hand as they walked into the kitchen. He began to teach her how to cook, how to cut spring onions and how to cut eggs. Just like many years ago. It was not difficult, right? It was very happy, wasn't it? The bright moon shone on the new world and the old brush pen shop. On the courtyard wall, an old cat was lying lazily. End of the full text. I will write down my mistakes in 2 days. Here are 2 simple sentences. First, whether I am narcissistic or not, I have to say that Nightfall is really good. I really praise myself at the end. Second, whether it is mushy or not, I have to say that I really thank everyone. As for the questions about science, I am naturally exempted. I am an idiot in this aspect, but I just want to write. The end of chapter 130. Awesome. I have written nearly 20,000 today. Awesome. I have written to my own height. Awesome. Finally, please see what votes you have. No matter what, please vote. This is the last time. I love you all. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.